So if you told me when I first started doing Storytime, that being January 2021, that I'd be doing my Storytime of my first semester of college today rather than this December, I would have thought that you were crazy. The reason is because at the time, I was in the 11th grade. I still thought that I still had 2 semesters to go before I graduated high school. Well, things actually ended up working out much differently than what I expected. So today, I'm going to talk about an incredibly abnormal semester of college for an incredibly abnormal student. I'm Zach, and this is Storytime 46, on June 3rd, 2022. So I think a good way to start this story time is talk about why exactly I'm much more different than the average college student. A good place to start is my class. So practically everyone enters college as a freshman, but I actually started college as a junior. The reason is because of where I went to high school. So I went to an early college. This is basically where you get both a high school diploma and an associate's degree while in high school for free. It saves a ton of money since college is very expensive. Students can apply to go here when they are in the 8th grade. Only about 30% of students get accepted. I was lucky enough to be part of that 30%, and I was able to attend. It was an amazing experience, and I'm very glad I went. Now, another reason that made me special in comparison to other students was my age. So, I'm only 17 years old. My 18th birthday is about 2.5 weeks away. On top of that, I'm also part of the class of 2022. So how did I manage to go to college at only 17 years old? Well, that has to do with graduating early. So throughout my time at early college, I paid close attention to my program evaluation. This basically shows what classes you've taken and what classes you need to take. I paid close attention to this throughout my time at early college, which in turn allowed me to make good class selections. In fact, my class selections were so good that by my second semester of junior year, I only needed 5 more classes. So therefore, I was able to graduate high school early with both my associate in science degree and business administration certificate, which also made me the first student at early college to graduate early with all 3 of these things. So yeah, I was very different from the average first-year college student. Let's now talk about how college worked. Stuff like where I go to college, my major, and housing. So let's start off with my college. So obviously, I will not state where I go to college, since that's kind of personal information. But I will state that it is a pretty large college within the University of North Carolina system, so it isn't out of state or anything. In fact, it is actually about an hour from where I live, so I could actually commute. Although I didn't, I was on campus. Anyways, this college has about 30,000 students. This is an incredibly huge jump compared to early college with only 200 students, so I had to get used to that. On top of that, the campus is pretty big, so I also had to get used to that as well. In fact, you will hear the phrase getting used to quite often throughout the story time, as this was probably the biggest transition in my entire life, so be prepared for that. Anyways, let's talk about my major. So I'm an accounting major. The school I go to has a pretty good business school, which is one reason I chose to go there. However, I interestingly never took any accounting courses this semester, as I first had to take some gen eds. I'll get to those later, but yeah, I'm an accounting major. Additionally, I have also been considering minoring in economics. I'll explain what got me interested in economics and why I might choose it as a minor much later on. Now, let's discuss housing. So I of course lived on campus. How my housing assignment worked was that I was in a 2-bedroom suite. Each bedroom contained 2 people, so I shared a room with someone, and we 4 shared a living room and a bathroom. Now, we have to apply for housing. I did not even select this housing option, but I guess they ran out of space and so they put me here, which made sense, as most people had been here since the fall semester and I was coming in during the spring semester. However, I was still very confused with Housing and Residence Life's, HRL, way of handling the assignments, so we had to choose from 8 different housing options, which is alright, that's a lot, but I mean, it's not a big deal. But what really pisses me off is that they don't tell you how full or how empty a specific space is. Why? That would literally save me a shit ton of struggle. But as we'll see in April, HRL at my college is run by possibly the most uncooperative people in the world. Another thing too in regards to roommates. So most colleges do interest surveys so that they can put you with someone you get along with easier. My college doesn't do that. They just assign you with someone randomly and say good luck. And as we'll see later on this story time, oh boy, this was something. And finally, our college doesn't give us our roommate's phone number. Instead, they give us our emails. Emails! Who the hell uses email to communicate informally? They're so bad. Anyways, the building I was assigned to was actually the engineering building. So this building has mostly engineering majors. It also had the engineering learning community. How I ended up here, I don't know. But I've got to say, this building is one of the most hilarious buildings to assign as the engineering building. So my college has a really good engineering program. In fact, the west side of campus is dedicated to engineering. But yet this building is the farthest storm away from that part of campus. Yeah, that's kind of stupid. On top of that, the building is architecturally one of the least appealing and least impressive on campus, which I found ironic. So yeah, this is going to be one hell of a semester. So then let's move on to Wednesday, January 5th, 2022. So I had to wake up early on this day. It was not the move-in day, but it was the day our college hosts what it calls SOAR for incoming students. This is an incredibly long and honestly kind of stretched out virtual seminar for students to learn about the college and maybe meet a couple other incoming students. Now, when I say stretched out, I mean it lasts from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Yeah, 9 hours. Holy shit, that's a long time. But it honestly was not as terrible as you might think. We had multiple breaks and our different events weren't back to back. It also was virtual, so we could easily goof off and do something else. We also learned some useful information about the college too. On top of that, at the end of the day, we got to register for classes too, so that was a bonus. I'd say there were really only two bad things about the SOAR. The first thing is time. 8 a.m. is super early for me, especially during this time. So basically from the Monday I graduated high school, December 13th, to a week after moving into college, I developed a habit of staying up to some pretty crazy hours. Practically every night, I stay up to at least 6 a.m. To give you all an idea of how late that is, that's generally when my parents get up, as they both are morning people, so I was going to bed when they were getting up. In fact, the latest I stayed up was one time when I stayed up to 9 a.m. That's practically an all-nighter. During this time, I was mostly staying up either playing video games or working on my book. Anyways, the second issue I found with SOAR was that one activity regarding identity. Now, I will get a little political here, and I'll go ahead and state that while I do not endorse any political viewpoints, and I myself is very apolitical, I do lean slightly towards the right, but I don't endorse any political viewpoints. Anyways, colleges have a tendency for being woke. Woke is a term that I don't really like to use a lot since it's kind of derogatory and it's been run down so much, but in this context, I think it's appropriate. So for this activity, we talked about identity and how we identified ourselves. So our counselor who was over the SOAR meeting asked us to share our race, gender, age, religion, where we're from, and pronouns. So this is something that as someone who isn't political is kind of stupid, particularly in regards to race, gender, and pronouns. So first off, I don't see race. I believe that all races are equal to one another and that all races deserve the same respect. So I don't see race. Then for the gender and pronouns, I thought this was silly because those are practically the same thing. So I just completely omitted the pronoun part. Multiple other students did the same, which I think kind of ticked off the counselor, but we got through it. So let's jump to January 7th. This is the day that I officially moved into college. Now before I begin, I want to talk about an issue college had in regards to returning and moving in for the spring semester. So the college decided to have all classes be virtual for the first 2 weeks. The reason they did this is because of coronavirus, particularly with Omicron variant being pretty rampant. Because of this, we were given the option of either delaying a return and waiting 2 weeks, or we could move in at the normal time. I chose to move in at the normal time, mostly so I could get away from home and go ahead and start college, so that's what I did. However, my roommate, the one that I shared a room with, chose to delay his return. Therefore, I got my room to myself for 2 weeks, which I thought was really good because it provided me time to transition and get used to being away from home and all the other shit that comes with it. Now, I didn't have the entire suite to myself, as one of my roommates, who lived in the other room, came back early as well. This was also a good thing, as he helped me immensely with transitioning to college life and where everything was. I should go ahead and mention that my roommates were at college the previous semester, just that they had someone else who bailed out, so I guess I was given the space. So I was the only new person here. Anyways, I'll talk about him a little bit later. Let's talk about January 7th. So, me and my parents packed all my stuff and headed out at around 11. Now when we got there, my sweet mate was not there. He and his girlfriend were shopping. They'd be back a few hours later, so then for me and my parents unpacked my stuff. We loaded everything in and set my room up. After we got everything in, my parents said goodbye and headed on out. That left me in the room by myself. I felt a little weird at first, like all students. That feeling of finally being on your own and living with your parents all your life is really weird, but it started to grow on me and I was able to knock myself back into reality. From the time my parents left to the time my sweet mate got back to the room, I mostly worked on my book. Just, for those who don't know, I'm writing a book. It's pretty much going to be a readable version of Storytime 40. Well, not necessarily the entire Storytime. Basically, the book will include things like my suicidal thoughts in 8th grade, as well as, of course, March 8th, 2018, which will be known as the Darkest Chapter. Although, the book is actually going to be more of an over-exaggerated version of Storytime 40, since it is supposed to be fiction but based on a true story. I plan to have it published probably around early 2023, so be on the lookout for that. Now, back to college, so at around 5 o'clock, my sweet mate and his girlfriend returned. I was actually in the living room at this time. I was probably on Instagram or something, taking a break from my book. Anyways, my sweet mate introduced himself and we shook hands, you know, typical. So this sweet mate was Joseph. He's from Monroe, which is like east of Charlotte, and I'm from Gastonia, which is west of Charlotte, so we're not too far from one another. Anyways, he's a cool dude. He's an engineering major. I'm not sure which one, but I'm pretty sure he's chemical. But anyways, his girlfriend is Delaney. She was really nice and very friendly. I believe she originally was a biology major, but she switched. I'm not too sure what major she switched to, but I can see why she switched. I took high school biology in 10th grade, and I took biology 1 and 2 in 12th grade, and I didn't really like biology, so I could see why she didn't want to do biology. Anyways, we three talked for a little bit, you know, just getting to know each other and stuff. And then about an hour later, all of us were getting a little hungry, so this was the perfect time for them to show me how the dining hall worked and where it was. And so that's what we did. Now, the dining hall was located in the south part of campus. Our room was located on the north side, so to get there, we just drove Joseph's car. Well, it was actually his mom's that he gave back to her the next day, but we used it to get there. Anyways, we ate for a little bit. I believe all three of us ate fries, since that was like the best thing they served, but I don't remember too much. We also talked some more. Anyways, after that night, we pretty much went our separate ways. I'm not too sure what they did, but during this time, I registered for classes, and I'll talk more about them once we get there. Anyways, the next day, I walked around campus by myself in order to get a sense of location. The first place I went to was the Student Union. This is a building that is located in the north central part of campus, so I went over there and explored the building. I saw that there were Bojangles out in here, so I ordered Bojangles. I also spotted the Wendy's. Outside of that, there was a bookstore as well as a second dining hall. However, that dining hall would not be available until everyone else got back 2 weeks later. That's why we had to go to the one in the south part of campus. I'll call the south dining hall the south dining hall, and in this one of the Student Union the north dining hall. Also in the Student Union was the dining to go service. So this is a service where we can order food to go via our meal swipes. We would order it from an app from our phone and then go there to get our food. I'll explain the service more in a bit, as like the dining hall in the Student Union, it was not available until all students were back on campus. After eating my Bojangles, I exited the Student Union and explored different areas of campus. I particularly looked at the buildings that my class would be in to be taking place in. Although at the end of the story time, I will actually give advice for college. One crucial piece of advice I want to go ahead and give right now is that the day before or 2 days before classes start, try to locate the building and classes that your classes are in. This will give you a better insight on where they are at first day of classes, as well as prevent you from being late. I did this and it helped me immensely. While I couldn't enter a couple of the buildings, I was still able to locate the buildings, which also helped when classes began in person. Anyways, that's all that happened that day. That Sunday was also rather uninteresting. Let's move on to Monday, January 10th, which was the first day of class. So to start, let's talk about my first class, being Liberal Studies 2101, which is Western History and Culture and Pursuit of Liberty. Now, I had to take some general ed courses because not all of my credits transferred in. Although I was still considered a junior, I still needed a few extra courses before I could take some actual business courses. That's why most of my courses this semester were gen ed and not actual accounting or business courses. Anyways, this first day for Western History was a little strange. So for these 2 weeks, each class was required to meet online via Zoom. Our professor, however, did not know this. He thought that by online, he was going to be teaching asynchronously. Therefore, when I woke up and logged on to Zoom, there was no Zoom session. I was a little confused, but I just passed it off. I'll discuss more about when we get to the Wednesday, January 12th. Anyways, the next class I had did actually meet on Zoom. This class was Business 2100, which is Business Professional Development. So normally first year students admitted into the college's business school take a class called Introduction to Business and Professional Development. If you saw Storytime 30 or 43, you might recall that I took a class called Intro to Business when I was in the 9th grade. So that class transferred as Intro to Business and Professional Development, which is Business 1101. So instead, I had to take Business Professional Development, which is a 1-credit class meant for transfer students with Intro to Business already taken. This class is more of an introduction to the university, as well as how to be successful in college and the workplace. Kinda like that academic support class I took back in 9th grade when I was like the most forgettable class I ever took. Ironically enough, this class was actually similar to that in the sense of being forgettable. The reason is because it only met on Mondays from 12:20 to 1:10, and it was a 1-credit course. Therefore, it wasn't really anything as impactful as like Western history. But that isn't to say that this class was useless. It was really helpful in providing direction and resources, and I learned a lot. Anyways, the first day wasn't much. Our professor simply introduced herself and we did an introductory assignment. The next class I had was not until 4. This was Math 1120, which is Calculus for Business, or Calculus as I'll refer to it as. So math is my strong suit. That's why I'm going into accounting. However, this class was pretty difficult. Not because of the material, as it wasn't anything too hard, it was the professor. So this professor sucked. he made rather simple material extremely complicated by adding a bunch of unnecessary steps in the methods, as well as just making things confusing. In fact, the more that he taught a certain topic, the less it made sense, so it was a pain. I'll explain this more as I discuss this class throughout the story time. So for the first day, we pretty much just went over the syllabus and talked about the expectations and stuff. However, I want to talk about the beginning of class for a second, because oh my god, this was hilarious. So before the professor got on the call, one of the students got pulled over for going 45 miles an hour on campus. The speed limit everywhere on campus is 20, by the way. He did not have his mic muted, so we got to hear him get screamed at, which was hilarious. But that's not even what made this funny. What made this really funny is after getting pulled over, he decided to ask the class if Chipotle was healthy. By then, the professor got on the call. He and a few students then started to talk about how healthy Chipotle was. This is really funny because I thought I was signing up for a calculus class, not a Chipotle class. To make this even more hilarious, the professor's camera was on and you could just see the amount of disappointment coming off of his posture. Like his body posture was just scream, "Why did I decide to be a professor?" It was hilarious, but after the guys finished, we started class and did all that. Anyways, let's talk about that night. So about every night, Joseph and Delaney played Mario Kart together, but on this night, they invited me to join them. I took up their offer and played. Now, as y'all know, I am pretty good at Mario Kart myself, particularly time trials on Ninja Hideaway and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Mario Circuit on Mario Kart Wii, so I kinda showed off my skill a little bit. I beat them in all races. It was still pretty fun for all of us. I never got invited to another Mario Kart session after this, but it was still really fun. Anyways, the next day, I had 2 new classes. So my first class was Geology 1200, which is an introduction to geology. So this class met every Tuesday and Thursday from 11:30 to 12:45. It was, as you can expect, about rocks. From rocks on the surface to the rocks under us to melted rocks blown out by volcanoes, we talked a lot about rocks. For this class, our professor did the typical. He just introduced himself and talked about the class and stuff. Right after geology from 1 to 215 came Earth Science 1101, which is physical geography, or Earth Science as I refer to it as. Anyways, this class was very similar to geology, as both classes talked about similar topics, but it didn't focus on rock formations and stuff like that. While we did talk about geology, we also focused on other earth sciences such as biology, meteorology, climatology, hydrology, which is my favorite, and pedology, which is the study of souls. So unlike geology, which focused specifically on one field in depth, this class was a broad overview of all earth sciences. For the first day, it went the same as all of the classes. Our professor just introduced herself and went over the syllabus. Nothing too crazy. So after that, I was free to do whatever. Now the next day, we finally met for Western History. So this was probably the hardest class in terms of attending. The reason is because this was a 9 a.m. It met from 9:05 to 9:55 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Yeah, that's tough. But what made this class really suck was the professor. So throughout the semester, I would learn that this professor is pretty narcissistic. So with all my other professors, while they required attendance, most of them understood that their class was gen ed, so they didn't treat their class like it was more important than anything else. Although my calc professor did to some extent, more on that later. But my Western History professor was a little different. He believed that his class was the most important class we would ever take. Yes, even more important than any courses within our major. While his class was important, this thought was still far from the truth. Liberal studies courses are almost always gen ed. There might be some major specific courses if you're a history or theater major or something like that, but even then, most of your liberal studies courses are still going to be gen ed. As an accounting major and possibly economics minor, any liberal studies course I take is gen ed. So this class wasn't as important as our professor claimed that his class was. Now, how exactly did he exemplify that his class was more important than all of our other classes? Well, one way he did this was through his attendance policy. So our professor set an incredibly strict attendance policy. At the beginning of the semester, he said that he would only allow us 4 unexcused absences. Any absences after that would result in a letter grade drop. This might not seem bad, after all, it got us to attendance stuff, but when you also consider the fact that this is a gen ed and not an actual accounting or economics course, you start to realize that yeah, that's a little bit too much. But not even that is why I felt like this professor sucked. The main issue I had with him was his teaching. Our professor rarely taught the class the actual content of the course. For the most part, he just went on political rants, so our professor is pretty vocal about his political views. Like most professors, he's pretty far left. Not too far, but still up there. I personally am a centrist who leans like slightly towards the right, but I still don't really care much for politics, because I think politics is kind of stupid. So a lot of what he said, I did not agree with. but I don't mind at all that he thinks differently. I think that it's a great thing because it exposes me to different beliefs. But what I don't like is being forced to go to class where I do not even learn about the content. You see, this wasn't just occasionally. No, he did this every single class. In fact, he did this a lot more to teach us Western history and culture, so he was pretty much forcing us to hear his political rant, which sucked. Another issue about him is that he was very snarky. He basically treated us like he was smarter than us, which I mean, that is probably true. Professors are pretty smart people, so he probably is smarter than most of us, just that he acted like he was smarter than everyone and that all of us were dumb, which is exactly what a professor ought not to do. Additionally, he was also super rude to everyone as well, so he was a really bad professor. Now I also had a 6th course, which is a lab that went along with geology. It met every Thursday. However, I am not going to mention that until I talk about the classes going back in person, as we did not do anything in this class until they went back to being in person, which made sense. After all, who the hell expects a bunch of college students to experiment on rocks from their dorm? So this class won't be mentioned until then. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and jump all the way to Friday, January 14th. So this was the day that I wrapped up my first week of college. So to celebrate, I decided to just go home for the weekend. Once again, my college is not too far from home, so I could easily drive back and forth whenever I wanted to. So that's what I did here. After Western history, I packed some stuff and went home. Now, I only stayed one night at home. The reason is because on Saturday night, we got snow. Therefore, had I waited till Sunday, I would have not been able to get back to campus due to snow. By the way, I know my northerners who are watching this are probably heavily confused about driving in the snow. So basically, here in the south, we don't chain our tires. Additionally, our roads are not built for extreme weather. Since where I live, we only get like 2 inches of snow a year. And that's like only like every other year. Most years, we don't even get snow. So that should explain a few things. Anyways, I didn't really do much that Friday. I just slaved around and played with Floppy. But the next day, before I went back to school, me and Mom went shopping. So this snowstorm had been hyped up for practically the entire week. So on Thursday, me, Joseph, and Delaney talked for a little bit. We were all pretty much going to survive the snowstorm together. Joseph had a bunch of snacks for us three to survive on just in case the dining halls were to close. I went home and bought more snacks as well as a mini fridge, so we were set. Anyways, just like what the Weather Channel said, it snowed on Saturday night. It started at around 2 a.m., which I actually stayed up and saw. The last time we had snow before this was February of 2020, so it had been a while, which is why I stayed up to see it. So the next day, campus was practically a winter wonderland. It was white all over. Now, being a college student in the South, the first thing I did was go outside and walk around. My parents bought me a so-called rain jacket, but let me tell you something. That ain't no rain jacket, that's a precipitation jacket. This thing was perfect for snow because it was very fluffy and kept me warm, which was needed when walking around in 20-degree weather. By the way, Northerners, the average January low where I live is about 35 degrees. Anything under 60 to me is super cold, and anything under 30 is practically unbearable. So yeah, just use that as a reference to how cold this is for me. Anyways, I didn't really explore much. I just walked around campus in the snow. It was really fun getting to see everything covered in white. I also saw a couple girls building a snowman and a few guys sliding down a hill, so everyone was pretty happy that day. Anyways, the snow ended up lasting until Wednesday. By then, all the snow had melted, but it wouldn't be the only snowstorm we would get. In fact, we would get another one very soon. In the meantime, let's go back to classes. Now, because classes were online, the snowstorm did not interfere with them. I still had to attend and stuff. But then that Monday, we didn't have classes since it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, so I at least had the day off and stuff. Sorry. So Tuesday, January 18th, let's talk about this geology class, because this was quite possibly the scariest class I've ever attended. So this happened at around the beginning of the class. So there's this woman who had her camera on, but with her camera on, she decided to hit up her vape, so she did this. Now, she looked like she was around 30, so I mean, this was perfectly legal, but it was still weird to do in geology class. But then, shit went from 0 to 100 when this woman brought out her rifle on camera. It looked like she was trying to clean her Glock or something. Everyone on the Discord server we made for the class just started going crazy. We made it even more unusual is that the professor just continued on. Like, he didn't bat an eye on this, so we were all scared to death. But that was when the woman looked over, and I think she realized that her camera was on, so she immediately left the call, and all of us were just in shock. Now, thankfully, our professor did address this situation at the end of class. He basically said that he will file an incident report on the campus security and encouraged us to do the same. So we all did. This campus security looked into this and ultimately expelled that woman, which is a decision I absolutely agree with. As a future firearm owner, as well as someone who fully supports the Second Amendment, I believe that there are places to bring and not to bring your firearm. An online Zoom call is not the place at all. While that gun couldn't do any physical harm to anyone, the Zoom call still represents an actual classroom. So this woman bringing her firearm on a Zoom call is equal to bringing a gun to an actual in-person class. So I think that she should have been expelled, and I think campus security did a good job handling this. Now, because of the security threat, we had to keep our class virtual for the next week. So while my other classes went back in person, Geology stayed online the next week. But Geology would actually not be the only class that stayed online. Earth Science had to stay online for an extra week as well because our professor's daughter caught COVID. This is actually a huge deal because I'm pretty sure that her daughter had asthma, so of course she had to stay home and take care of her. So yeah, those classes stayed online for a little bit. For the other classes, we went back in person, so I at least went back for those. Now let's jump a little bit to January 21st. So this was a Friday night. Now I could have gone home on this day, but I didn't. The reason is because we literally got another snowstorm. Yeah, just 5 days after one snowstorm, we got another one. In southern North Carolina, that is super rare. So yeah, we got snowed in again. Luckily, me, Joseph, and Delaney were still prepared for the snowstorm, since we had a bunch of snacks and drinks from the weekend before, so we were ready. Additionally, we didn't get as much snow as the snowstorm before. In fact, all the snow pretty much melted by Sunday, so we were all good. Now, the Sunday itself was also a really important day as well. So this is the day that my roommate, the one that I shared my room with, came back. He came back that night. I actually had gotten back from the dining hall and I heard music from my room when opening it, which kind of told me that he was back. When I opened the door to my room, sure enough, he was there folding his clothes. I said hello and we talked for a couple hours while watching Rick and Morty. Now with him, I'm not actually going to state his name. The reason is because I know that in his hometown, he's a public figure, as he's part of the band that's pretty well known where he lives and he does a lot of concerts, so I won't state his name here. But I learned a few things about him. First thing I learned about him was that he smoked weed. In fact, this was actually right when I entered a room. He was in the middle of smoking a blunt. While I personally support weed being legal and stuff, I am against using it myself, and I don't like being around people who are using it. So seeing him do that, I was like, oh shit, this isn't going to be good. Anyways, I also learned that he is from Asheville. My grandmother lives in Asheville, and yeah, both of us confirmed that's pretty much the Nashville, Tennessee in North Carolina. Hippie land, as we often call it. Meanwhile, I grew up in a really rural city outside. I grew up in a suburb of Charlotte, so it's pretty safe that we come from two completely different places. Oh, and to top it all off, he apparently was born in Chicago. This is super ironic because before I went off to college, my uncle joked about how everyone's first year roommate always says they're from Chicago. I found that super hilarious, and the fact that my first year roommate was actually born in Chicago makes it more hilarious. Anyways, I also learned that he is a business major, so he was kind of similar to me in regards to major, although I believe he's actually doing general business. That kind of made me go, I see he's a partier. Now, excuse me for going on a tangent here, but a common misconception people make is that a business degree is super easy. That is true for general business degrees, but a specific business degree such as accounting, management, marketing, international business, economics, those are actually not that easy. So even though I am technically majoring in a business field, my work isn't as easy as everyone says. Accounting is actually a difficult degree in general. It's not crazy difficult like pre-med or STEM, but it's still difficult. General business, like what my roommate is majoring in, is really easy. That's the major where final exams are coloring books. Just wanted to clarify that. Anyways, I'll talk a little more about him as we go on throughout this story time. Now the other suite mate also returned. His name is Cooper. He's from Mooresville, which is like directly north of Charlotte. So I'm not too far from him either. He's also a mechanical engineering major, so he's also pretty math oriented like me. Additionally, he's also really nice and really cool guy in general. So yeah, he was awesome. But probably the coolest thing about him is that he swims. Of course, if you've seen either Storytime 19 or 34, you know that I also swim. Well, I used to be a year-round swimmer, but now that I'm just a seasonal swimmer, I'm not sure whether Cooper swims year-round or during the summer. I would guess the summer because of college and stuff, but yeah, definitely cool that we have that in common. Anyways, let's jump a little bit to Monday, January 24th. So this was when classes finally became in person. Well, 3 of my classes. And then one started, which I'll get to when I talk about Thursday, January 27th. Anyways, let's talk about Western history. So I normally woke up at 8:45 to get ready for this class, but because it was now in person, I had to get up at 8 o'clock. As a night person, this really sucked. I wish our school offered 2 or 3 a.m.s. Even though those might sound ridiculous, those would literally have higher attendance than morning classes. If only. Anyways, for this class, our professor just went over the syllabus again, which is actually what he had done for the class that we were online. He just went over the syllabus and rules and other stuff. We had still not actually dove into the material. But now that we were in person, I could at least see who was all in the class and stuff. Now I sat in the second to the front row. In front of me was this girl who was really attractive. She had long black hair and she had a beautiful face. At first, I thought she was cute, but I didn't really think too much about it. But as time progressed, though, I would start to like her a lot more. And shit, I'm already blushing. This is embarrassing. Anyways, I'll talk about this girl more in March, as I will do possibly the craziest and most not like Zach thing ever. Now, while our professor just went off on the syllabus and class rules and stuff, I just sat there on my computer on Discord, as well as occasionally looking at the girl in front of me. Okay, so after that, I had business a couple hours later. Outside of being our first in-person class, it was nothing crazy. It was just attending, doing random shit. Then later on at 4, I got to attend Calc in person for the first time. It wasn't anything too special, just our professor kind of explaining how we'll do things in person and stuff. Now, because Geology and Earth Science were still online, let's talk about my 6th class being Geology Lab. So this was a lab that I participated in every Thursday from 2:30 to 5:15. Now, while that might sound like a long time, our class normally did not even go past 4, so it wasn't that bad. Now, this class was not taught by my geology professor. Instead, it was actually taught by a grad student who TA'd this class alongside working on her master's in geology. She was really cool and really fun. Each Thursday, we did a lab, and then we sometimes had a quiz that went along with the lab. The labs weren't really anything too spectacular. In fact, for the most part, they were just identifying rocks. But our TA made the otherwise boring class really fun and enjoyable, so I look forward to this class every week. For the first day, we did a lab on contour maps, basically how to read them and why they're important. It was really fun. Anyways, that's all I got for January. We can finally move on to February. To start, let's talk about returning to geology in person. So our first day in person was February 1st. However, the first 30 minutes weren't actually about rocks. We actually had the Dean of Student Affairs to come to class and talk to us about school safety. This was when we learned that that woman who with a gun got expelled. He also applauded us for reporting her and doing the right thing. He then talked a little bit about school safety and why doing what we did was important. Afterwards, our geology professor talked a little bit about it, and then we talked about rocks. By the way, rocks were a big need throughout this class. We all joked about how all we were going to learn about in this class was about rocks and what rocks do. This actually wasn't the case, as we talked about geologic processes such as plate tectonics, earthquakes, volcanoes, groundwater, and geological aging. Whenever we talked about something not directly about rocks, our professor would always give us a hard time saying, and he thought this was a class about rocks. I loved him so much. He was such an amazing professor. On top of that, he was such a nice person as well, so my geology professor rocked. Okay, yeah, that was probably the worst joke I've ever cracked on Storytime, so you can dislike the video now. Anyways, right after geology, I also got to do earth science in person for the first time. Now, earth science was in the same room as geology, so I actually didn't have to move from my seat. I just sat there and waited for a class to start. Class itself was also rather rudimentary. Our professor just talked about how our class would work in person and stuff, but what was really interesting about her class is that even though we were now in person, she offered to do Zoom for anyone who didn't feel like going to class. So we actually didn't have to come to our class physically to be present, as we could just hop on a Zoom call and watch it from there. I never did this since I was already there. I just stayed in person and participated in class from there. Now, even though everything was in person, that didn't mean February was a good month. In fact, this is a terrible month for me. Let's talk about why it was. So first off, let's discuss my roommate. Oh boy. So, after living with him for a couple weeks, I learned that being around him and living with him sucked. Like, a lot. To start, let's talk about his weed. At first, I thought that I could maybe adapt to it and just let him smoke it and stuff, but after a few weeks, yeah, I couldn't handle it. It wasn't even the smell that I hated. It was the fact that if it was illegal, and if he got caught, he might blame it on me, and then I would have to face not only expulsion, but also criminal charges. Actually, even if he didn't, both of us would still get expelled and face charges because I would be guilty by affiliation. That's why I hated being there. His actions could have got me in trouble for something I didn't partake in. And as I've already said before, housing and residence life at my school is extremely uncooperative, so even if I had asked them for a drug test, they would probably have said no. Additionally, the more that I talked to them and stuff, the more scared I got of this dude. He partied throughout high school. He had a carefree personality about college, and a bunch of other things that made me really uncomfortable. In fact, I don't know if he does, but if he had a criminal record, I would honestly not be surprised. he seemed like the type of dude to have criminal charges. Because of this, I would actually sleep with my wallet and phone in my pockets because I feared that he might steal from me or buy drugs. In fact, I once even considered buying a pocket knife or something to sleep with just in case I had to defend myself. And the second part was that this is how I had to live for the whole semester. That room was pretty much my home. Home is where one is supposed to feel the safest. Nobody should be afraid to go home. But for me, this was not the case. Because of him, I would often stay in the library for 7 to 10 hours at a time, mostly getting back to my room at around 2 a.m. In fact, I once spent a total of 13 hours in the room just so I didn't have to be with my roommate. Yeah, this dude intimidated the hell out of me. Oh, and to top it all off, this dude for whatever reason kept the room incredibly dirty, so I don't think this man has ever been told to clean his room before, because by mid-February, his side of the room was just a complete shithole. Like, if you looked at my side and his side, you would be amazed by how different they are. On my side, I had a laundry bag that I placed all my dirty clothes in, so I didn't have anything on the floor other than my chair. Additionally, while I didn't make the bed, I never had anything on my bed permanently and kept my space clean. My roommate, on the other hand, had a 2-foot pile of dirty clothes on his side. His desk was filled up by his weed as well as a few other additional stuff. And his bed was filled with some stuff on this, of things. Yeah, this man was dirty. So, pretty understandably, I didn't want to be with him or really anyone like him. After all, I'm not here to party. I'm here to get my degree, learn how to be independent, meet people who will encourage me to achieve my goals. Not people who will get me to binge drink or do other childish activities. So in early February, we did a thing called chats. These were chats with our RAs that we had to do once a semester. For this chat, I decided to bring up to my RA about the issues I had with my roommate, and I gotta say, he was super understanding and really cool about it. I also got to learn that he's a lot like me, and he's not a party person. And he doesn't approve that stuff, which I mean, that makes sense because he's an RA, but he was still really cool and helped me through it. Now, afterwards, he told me that he would tell the supervisor about this to get him in contact with me, which is cool. I was pretty happy about it and had some hope. So then the next week, I got to talk to the supervisor. He was really cool. We just talked about my issue with my roommate and stuff. I told him that I didn't like his weed and I felt really unsafe around him. He told me that they might be able to find emergency housing, so I was happy. Unfortunately, this hope was lost when I found out that they told me about my roommate about my concerns. So I really wanted this to be kept secret from my roommate because obviously I was sharing a room with him. We saw each other all the time. My logic was that if he could get away with smuggling drugs or other illegal stuff in the room, what would stop him from actually doing something with me? So then telling my roommate made me even more scared. Therefore, during this time, I would sleep with my stuff in my pockets, but then I would literally have a knife underneath my pillow. Because looking back on this dude, I doubt he's ever thought about doing something bad to me, but if he did, this would have been the time. I also once spent the night in the library just to be away from him. It wasn't a good idea though, as I had to skip Western history due to how nauseous I was, but it definitely demonstrated how frightened I was of him. I also want to mention that because of this, I would come home every weekend. I needed to, as I needed somewhere where I felt safe. I feel very safe when I'm at home, so this is where I went every weekend starting mid-February and would continue to the end of the semester. My hope was lost even more when I found out that they couldn't find any emergency housing, so I was stuck with him. But luckily, a miracle happened. So the night that I found out that there was no emergency housing, he did not sleep in the room for whatever reason. In fact, he would be vacant for a whole week. This made me feel very safe. A week later though, he would come back, but he would only go back to the room to take a shower and do schoolwork. The reason was because he actually got a girlfriend. He pretty much spent all of his time in her room, as she had her own room. Therefore, I felt a lot safer, so it did work out in the end. Additionally, whenever he came back to the room for stuff, I would feel a lot less scared as time progressed, so it worked out in the end. Because I noticed how uncommon he was in the room, I started hanging out in the room much more often and therefore was able to feel a lot safer in college, so I'm pretty happy that worked out. Unfortunately, in April, we're going to see housing disappoint me again, but just like this situation, it will also get resolved. Now, how about we move away from this? Let's talk about my first ever test I took in university. So this was a test for geology. I took it on February 4th. It was just, let's just say, formatted differently than what I expected. So the way this test was formatted was that it was online. How it worked is that while we could go to class to take it, we actually didn't have to come to class. We would just pull up the test the time that we normally had class in and work on it. This class was only the only class like this. But I did it, and I ended up making an 84 on it. I was really satisfied with this grade, as it felt like I deserved it. The class average was like a 65, so I did pretty much better than most people. Of course I didn't celebrate by getting some Chick-fil-A. By the way, this is probably how I do things throughout college. Whenever I take an exam, I get some Chick-fil-A because I damn well deserve that shit. You'll see this trend a lot throughout the story time, by the way, so be mindful of that. I also got to take my first and so far only midterm I've ever had to take for a university class. So this was a midterm for Western history. It was formatted like the Geology exam, but unlike Geology where we had to take it on a certain day and time, this exam just had a due date at 11:59. On top of that, this test was split into 2 parts. Anyways, let's talk about this exam, because this was quite possibly the weirdest and most unusual test I've ever taken. And when I say test, I don't mean midterm or final. No, I mean out of every single test I have taken since the 1st grade, this was the strangest one. So y'all probably heard the story involving a professor who made their final but wrote it on the chalkboard for students to write their name and on it and turn it in without writing anything on the test. So that's kind of what the midterm was like, except we still had to do the test content. I've probably already got you confused, but you'll understand. Anyways, so the first part of the test was structured like a normal test. It had 10 questions that were matching and stuff. However, the content was incredibly odd, so it actually wasn't until mid-February when we finally started talking about actual course content. Before then, it was about the class instructions and stuff. So therefore, our midterm was literally a syllabus quiz. Yeah, our midterm was about the syllabus, as well as about our professor. And however, what made this test even more strange was the final question. So the final question on this exam was actually a pretty normal question. It asked us which of the following statements was true. There were 3 statements. The incorrect ones were very obvious. The correct one was also very glaringly obvious, although it wasn't necessarily correct in practice. It stated that all opinions shared in class would be respected and seen as accurate. While it was definitely the right answer, our professor was actually pretty resistant to any arguments even remotely on the right, so it wasn't true in practice, but it was still true in theory. But what made this question incredibly strange was that beside the answer was a code. The instructions said to copy and paste or write down the code to the answer we selected, and then we were going to use that code for the second part. So I did that. Then the second part, what happened was that I put in the code, and then it told me to write my name in the text box. I did that, and then I learned that by doing that, I would receive a free 100. Had I not done that, I would have received a free 0. So yeah, I got a free 100 on this test for simply following the directions. On top of that, even if we didn't select the right answer, only a complete dumbass would have gotten that question wrong, by the way. Our group chat for the class had the right code posted like in a gazillion times. Therefore, on the second part, they could just paste the right code and get a free 100. It was simple. Well, the next day, I would learn that there were some pretty bovine people in our class. So apparently, I think about 20% of students ended up taking a 0 for this test. Yeah, for a test that was literally a free 100, we still had people who failed. That's sad. Understandably, our professor was pissed off, so he set this entire class to going on a rant about how we needed to do better and stuff. But even though I agreed with what he said, I felt like he was saying this to the wrong crowd. Even though those 20% of students were incredibly ill-minded, 80% of us actually listened and followed the directions. Additionally, if those students couldn't make 100 on the test, do you really expect them to come to class? I think that only a handful of the students who failed that exam actually went to class that day. So he really ranted to the wrong students. In the group chat, we also kind of scolded those students as well, although we also kind of complained about how the professor was ranting to the wrong crowd. His rant was like a professor ranting about attendance to people who attend class. It wasn't the right audience. Unfortunately, the final would not be like this, but like the midterm, it would be a super unusual test that I'll get to later on. Anyways, let's talk about calculus. So I had grown to really despise my professor. There are 4 reasons why I didn't like him. First, let's talk about how he did things. So one thing I did like about him was that his enthusiasm for the content. You could tell he had a passion for teaching math, which is always appreciated, especially when you consider that many professors care a lot about more about the research than their students. However, like my Western history professor, he had some pretty narcissistic thoughts about his class. Now, I'll give him credit for like my Western history professor. Now, I'll give him some credit for not being like my Western history professor in the sense that he taught the class like he thought the class was the most important thing in the world, because he did. But rather than thinking that his class was the most important class we would take, he believed that his class was the only class we were taking. I know this because of a comment he made in class. Here's what he said, and I quote, "What I expect is that every day you go back to your residence and study this material." Now this is a completely ridiculous statement because it implies that we don't have anything else to do, such as other classes as well as other things like work or family. Don't get me wrong, his class is very important, but it shouldn't be the #1 priority. After all, we have other classes too, So even if we didn't have other priorities as high as it, we still had other classes that were the same level of priority, so expecting us to go home and study this material every single night is a bit ridiculous. On top of that, most people in this class were college freshmen. He realizes that college freshmen party, right? Well, I don't, nor do I plan to, but most freshmen do, so him thinking that this class dominates everything is quite ridiculous. The reason actually connects with the second and third reason. So the second reason has to do with our first quiz. So this is a random pop quiz he gave in mid-February. So in the class before this, we learned the chain rule. At the time, this was an incredibly difficult concept for me, so I needed time to grasp it. But just 2 days after teaching us this concept, he gave us a quiz on it. Now this might sound like I'm bitching, but wait till you hear this. So throughout this class, we used an online program called Hawks to help us learn the content. Each lesson came with the Hawks assignment where we would do problems and practice what we learned. However, our chain rule assignment was not due until early March. It was mid-February when he gave us this quiz. Yeah, it was the class after teaching us it. Oh, and it was closed notes and independent as well. Yeah, that's incredibly unfair because nobody had done the assignment yet. As expected, the class average was less than a 30 on it. Needless to say that our professor was furious. He got really mad that we didn't make high enough and claimed that we were lazy and needed to start taking the class more seriously. This was just a downright pathetic rant, as nobody came prepared for that quiz, and he pretty much removed every opportunity for us to pass. Luckily, our lowest quiz grade was dropped, so it didn't actually affect my grade. However, this being one of only 2 quizzes we took throughout his class. I explained what happened on the second quiz in April. Now, the third reason I didn't like him was that he assigned us homework over spring break. Yes, you heard me right. He assigned us homework over spring break. Now, spring break isn't until early March, which I'll talk about, but basically this professor gave us some Hawks assignments to do during spring break. Now, I will say, he did give us some time before spring break to do some of them, but there was one lesson that he taught the class before spring break whose assignment wasn't due till middle of spring break. Most students during spring break are going to Florida or somewhere else during spring break. I didn't because I didn't have any friends, nor did I have any money. But this man really thought that students would be doing schoolwork during spring break. That's just obnoxious. We're supposed to be relaxing and taking a break from spring break, not schoolwork. That's why it's called spring break. But this man clearly didn't know that word break meant, so he assigned us some shit. Now, not needless to say that not many people did these assignments. In fact, I was one of the only few students who did mine, so this was just stupid for him to assign stuff over break. The final reason I didn't like him had to do with a thing called practice tests. So oftentimes, the professor give out practice tests to help students prepare for any actual test. They generally are very useful and help students determine what they need to work on. Our professor took practice tests very seriously. So these practice tests were all Hawks. However, they were way harder than the real test. The real test consisted of 50 free response problems. But get this, or the practice test consisted of 50 free response problems. But get this. They had a time limit of 1 hour 30 minutes. The final exam only had 36 problems and we were given 2.5 hours for it. And for the other tests, they ranged from 14 to 26 questions and we were given 1 hour and 15 minutes for them. Each test consisted of mostly multiple choice problems too. Oh, and to add fuel to the flames, the questions themselves on the practice test were the hardest of their kind, while the actual test had problems that ranged from easy to medium. And to just make things even worse, the practice tests were graded by accuracy, unlike our other Hawks assignments that were graded off completion. We were also only given 2 attempts on the practice test. This completely defeats the point of practice, especially when we were graded on these and only got to do them twice. So yeah, practice tests sucked. And just for reference, the class average on the first practice test was a 43, the second was a 55, and the third was a 48. Meanwhile, the actual test class average for the first test was a 62, the second was a 53, and the third was a 51. Therefore, it's pretty safe to say that actual tests were a lot easier than the practice tests. So of course this professor was a pain. However, sometime after spring break, I think this professor either had a change of heart or came to his senses, as he would get a lot better later on this semester. But the first half, damn, he sucked. Now in February, I also got to take my first test for math, or calculus. So this is a really simple test. We had 15 multiple choice questions and 10 free responses. The 15 multiple choice questions were really easy, and the free responses was literally just plugging in numbers. Like, it was stuff that I learned in Algebra 1 back in 8th grade, so that was easy. I ended up making a 92 on this test, which I was very happy about. I also made the highest grade in the class as well, which was also something to be happy about. So yeah, I did pretty well. Let's move on to Earth Science. So this month, we also got to take our first exam. Now the way that exams work for this class is that we had 3 exams. Our first exam was in late February. So the exams for Earth Science were in my opinion the hardest among each of the classes I took, which made sense, as I found Earth Science to be the hardest out of the 6 classes I took this semester. Part of the reason this class was so difficult was in fact partly because of the exams. These exams use Lockdown Browser. There were also 50 questions on the first and second exam. I'll talk about the third exam a little later, as it worked a little differently. Now the good thing about these exams was that we were allowed to have one front and back page of notes. Additionally, the TAs created the Kahoot before each exam to help us study, so studying for these exams were actually pretty easy. And it showed. I ended up making an 84 on this exam, which I was really happy about, considering it was a pretty difficult exam, so I was happy. Now to move on to business, so in this class we did 3 Prospect for Success papers, or PSPs as I'll call them. They were really simple papers that were aimed at helping us with different aspects of professional development. The first one we did was cultural awareness. So this paper had 3 parts. The first part was to define cultural awareness. I defined cultural awareness as the ability to understand the differences between oneself and other people. I then went on about why it's important and stuff. Nothing really important. The second part was about how culture shaped us. For this, I decided to do something that was pretty risky, and that was discuss religious beliefs. Now, I'm not afraid to say that I'm a Christian. I'm very proud to say that I'm saved by the blood of Christ. However, the reason I call this risky is because we are talking about a public university. Public universities tend to have negative thoughts about Christianity, so it was a little bit risky for me to talk about growing up in church and hearing the word of God shape who I am today. Luckily, even though my professor was an atheist, she was cool with it and actually said that she found it interesting how it influenced me, so it worked out. I was also a little surprised that she didn't count points whenever I capitalized God's pronoun. Grammatically, it's wrong, but spiritually, it's right. We capitalize pronouns referring to him in order to show that we're talking about the one true God and not a false God. That's why we capitalize his pronouns. The third part of the paper was probably the hardest and most time-consuming. For it, we had to discuss how cultural awareness influenced other people. For this, we had to watch this hour-long video by the College of Business that talked about diversity and inclusion. This was actually a conference that was held a couple years ago when they invited some pretty high-up people in the corporate world and asked them how culture had shaped their business practices. We had to write about the 2 people and discuss how exposure to different cultures influenced them in their business practices. Now, being a super long video and being incredibly boring, I did not watch the entire thing. I did, however, watch the first 10 minutes of it, and let's just say this was one of the longest 10 minutes of my life. The first 10 minutes was just this woman talking about the accomplishments of the college, as well as talking about how they strive to encourage diversity and inclusion and stuff. Now, I get this is business. It's supposed to be boring, but holy shit, this was just pathetic. To make this even more monotonous, this lady had a very difficult time talking. She was saying and after every word, and she talked so slowly. Like, I couldn't tell if I was watching a video about diversity and inclusion, or if I was watching President Biden's State of the Union speech. If I was President Biden, I would be sending $40 billion for this woman's speech therapy. And this wasn't some 80-year-old granny, but this woman looked about my mom's age, and she had a doctorate in business as well. So there should be no reason why this woman should be speaking like a 7th grader who didn't do their book report. After those 10 excruciating minutes, they finally gave it to their first speaker. This speaker was a business owner around the area. Unlike the woman who opened, he spoke clearly and to the point. To make things even worse for that woman, English was this guy's second language. His first language is Spanish, as he's from Cuba. So really, had he not said English was his second language, I would have never guessed that, as his English was like perfect. So yeah, once it came on, I was a little bit more in tune. He talked about his business and how his culture shaped it, but he also talked about how he interacted with the African community and learned about their needs and wants. This allowed him to increase his inventory with different items to appease his African buyers, giving him higher sales. This is actually pretty interesting, so props to him for doing this and making it interesting. The next speaker was this director of some pretty big business in the southeast that I can't remember. By the way, when I say he's the director, I mean he's literally one step away from being the CEO. Like, if you worked for this company, he would be your boss's 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 boss. Yeah, you could tell he's pretty serious about his job. And by his presentation, you can tell that he is. He's really professional to where you kept your attention, but he didn't make you doze off or anything. So props to him. Anyways, he talked about how his company uses business resource groups. So one reason why diversity is celebrated is because different groups of people think differently. So in business resource groups, people with similar backgrounds are put with each other and work with one another. Each group forms an idea, and then once everyone has their ideas, everyone comes together and shares. Then they create a product while incorporating every group's ideas. He talked about the success of this strategy and how it has benefited the business, which I thought was really interesting myself. Anyways, in this paper, I wrote about both of these men and how cultural awareness affected them and stuff. That way I didn't have to watch any more of the video, because it was announced earlier that woman was going to appear again to give closing remarks. And plus, I had other things to do, so I just stopped watching it after the demands who talked about business resource groups. And surprisingly, I actually made 100 on this paper. My professor was very happy with the paper and said that she really loved and said some other remarks. So yeah, I made 100 on my first paper for university. Now, before I move on to March, I first want to talk about my mental health. So every February, my mental health tends to deplete. February is generally my worst month. It was the worst month of 2019 and 2021, and 2022 was no exception. I generally get seasonal depression during this month, which I guess is probably just due to cold weather, as well as this month also being when Valentine's Day is and me being single all my life. However, this seasonal depression has always been something different. Of course, in 2018, you had the whole bullying as well as a billion other factors. In 2019, a lot of it had to do with swimming and me wanting to quit due to my asshole coach. 2020 was a little strange, as February was actually a good month, just that I wish I could say for the rest of 2020. Then in 2021, I was particularly depressed in regards to COVID and stuff, wanting it to be over and wanting things back to normal. For 2022, my reason for the seasonal depression was loneliness, so transitioning to college was an incredibly difficult transition. It was incredibly similar to the transition from elementary school to intermediate school. Everyone else started intermediate school when they were in the 5th grade and they at least knew some people. I didn't. I started and spent my only school year there in the 6th grade, where I didn't know anyone or school while everyone else knew everyone and everything about it. The transition to college was the same way, except it was even tougher because of my age. I'm 17 years old. In fact, I was the youngest student enrolled at the college. Now, it might be weird that I'm bringing up my age, but I am bringing it up to talk about clubs. So if you saw Storytime 40, you might know about my thoughts on the whole only being allowed to sit with those in your second block rule that my middle school had. That rule was a factor that led me to being suicidal in 8th grade, as it prohibited me from escaping the bullies. On top of that rule made literally no sense either, as if you saw that Storytime, you know that it did the exact opposite of why it was placed, to make sure nobody was sitting at their table by themselves, which is what ended up happening to me. The college has a similar rule regarding clubs, so at my college, you were required to be at least 18 years old to join a club. Why? I was literally the only student that it affected. What was the point? I was super angry about this rule because that meant that I couldn't join a club, which is the easiest way to make friends in college. On top of that, you have to remember that just because I'm younger than everyone, I'm still a student. So why didn't I get the benefits that other students get? It just doesn't make any sense. However, despite my age, I was still able to attend events, so I decided to take advantage of it. Every Wednesday night, a local pastor did a sermon on hot topics and what the Bible says about them. The group was supported by a few couples as well as around 10 regular attendees. I refer to this group as Campus Bible Fellowship, because when our professor talked about these topics, he would use the Bible to defend his reasoning. And so for my first time coming here was in mid-February. I came in not really expecting much, but what I got out of this first session was more than I would have ever thought. So literally right when I entered the room that it was taking place in, the people over it were all about me. Like they were all getting to know me and introducing me to the group. On top of that, they were so friendly and polite to me. Like seriously, they were some of the nicest and just downright best people I've ever met. So yeah, Campus Bible Fellowship rocks. I also met one person who will be pretty important later on. So his name's Drew. He was a sophomore, so he was actually 3 years older than me, as he was 20. He is double majoring in finance and economics. Because I'm an accounting major and economics minor, that immediately makes both of us good friends, just because we have that in common. He's also from South Charlotte, so I live just west of him. Unfortunately though, Drew got completely wrecked by Thursday exams throughout the semester, so he couldn't attend Campus Bible Fellowship every Wednesday night. But in April, we'll see both of us becoming really close throughout a class I interestingly complained about earlier. I talked with him for a little while. I also got to meet the pastor. So he's a pastor at a local church, but he does this every Wednesday just because he loves preaching so much. He's grown up around the area all his life, and so he's always wanted to bring his hometown closer to God, which I heavily applaud. Even though I do consider myself very religious and very passionate, I could never do this type of stuff that he's capable of. Then after a couple minutes, I got to hear what he does best, and boy, he was really good. He did a lesson on critical race theory and what the Bible says about it. He was so good. He defended every single point he made, and his execution of words was perfect. So yeah, he was awesome. So that night, I pretty much committed myself to this event every Wednesday night, so I did it. But the next Wednesday, the pastor gave a sermon that hit extremely close to home. He talked about suicide and what the Bible says about it. As stated earlier, as well as in Debt and Storytimes 28 and 40, I struggled with suicidal thoughts when I was 13, and even had a plan to kill myself, and I am prudently pulled through with it on March 8, 2018. Thankfully, I survived and got the help that I needed. But the fact that we were talking about suicide wasn't why this study hit close to home. What hit close to home was the pastor talking about what the Bible said about it. This hits really close to home because my attempt is actually what led to me come to know Christ. A month after the situation happened, I would get saved, all because God guided me through and demonstrated his love for me during such a difficult time. If you ever want to know why I believe in God, this is exactly why. So, after the sermon, I actually talked with the pastor's son. I particularly brought up the situation and explained it, which is incredibly rare for me to do due to the severity of the situation, but through how he and the rest of the group treated me, I trusted him and everyone else immensely. We did talk for a little bit longer, and that was when he invited me to do something that I thought he'd never ask. He asked if I would like to share my testimony to the group one day. I told him that I'd love to, so we set a date for March 2nd, and I would share it, and that's when we did it. Now, part of me was super excited, as I knew that sharing my testimony could actually help someone in the group if they were struggling with the same things as me. But the other part of me was incredibly nervous. Even though I had shared my testimony multiple times in Storytime, I had never told my testimony in person or in front of a group of people or anything. However, I had a strategy for overcoming this anxiety. That strategy was in the form of my parents. So I told my parents about what was happening and asked if they'd like to come to Campus Bible Fellowship that day. They were super excited about this and they said hell yes in a heartbeat. They gave me a lot of much needed support and I immediately got to work. So now let's move on to March. March 2022 was a whole lot better than February, and March normally is. Of course, 2018 and 2020 were exceptions, with March 2018 having, of course, the worst day of my life, and 2020 being the start of the coronavirus pandemic. But normally, early March, especially years following 2018, is pretty bad, as I tend to be a lot more emotional during this time with it being near the anniversary and stuff. But any day past the 8th, I tend to be in a much happier mood and a lot more energy. So let's start off with the sharing of my testimony. So this was March 2nd. I was really pumped up for it. Even though this obviously all happened to me and stuff, I still jotted some notes as reference, as well as to plan out what I was going to say, as well as how to better comfort myself, as this was going to be one hell of a presentation. Speaking of which, I also created some slides on both show pictures as well as a list of Bible verses, as I referenced multiple verses that backed up what I was saying. Anyways, let's talk about it. So to start off the presentation, I decided to talk about transformations. I think this is a very appropriate way to start talking about it, as when one gives their life to Christ, they are completely transformed. I sure was when I gave my life to Christ, as I'll get into that in a little bit. So I first gave two examples of transformations. The first one was two side-by-side pictures. The left one being of me in my first day of high school, and the right one being me on my last day of high school. For the second example, I did on my cat, Floppy. The left picture was a picture of him when he was just a month old, which was when we got him, and the right was a picture of him laying on my bed back in February. Then, I said that there was one transformation that was even more significant than any other transformation, which was of course giving one's life to Christ. For this, I used another picture to comparison, this time on the left of being me the day I was discharged from the mental hospital, and the one on the right being of my baptism. I did start to talk about where I'm from and all that. I also cracked a few jokes about Gaston County, which is the county that I'm from. I like to refer to Gaston County as CRSD, Cowboys, Rednecks, and Sundrop. Basically, it's Hillbilly Central down there, and Gastonia pretty much is Hillbilly Capital. Anyways, I did talk about going to church as a kid and attending church events like Vacation Bible School, as well as that one church camp where I was a rising 6th grader. I didn't mention details, but I just said that I did these as a kid, and while I did learn from them, they failed to persuade me to make a decision, as I did not enjoy these events. But it was okay, as God planned the day and how I was going to give my life to Him millions, billions, and trillions of years before the earth was even created. By the way, if y'all like to know how these two things went for me, they were story times 39 and 41 respectively. Both of these are really good story times too, so I highly recommend them. And then, I fast forwarded all the way to 8th grade. So to start, I talked about my classes. I talked about how I was able to take high school classes and how much they stressed me out and stuff. By the way, the full version of this testimony is Storytime 40. I'm pretty much just skimming through this right now. Anyways, I also discussed being bullied as well as introducing the lunch situation. This would have been when I began struggling with depression, that being September 2017. I did talk about how it affected my behavior and stuff. Nothing too significant. I didn't jump to January 2018. So this was when depression got really extreme. So this would have been when depression would start to dominate my life. I felt like there was no hope and I had a lack of energy. Then came February. So this would be the month I became suicidal. I started feeling like had I just killed myself, the world would have been a better place. This was also when the boys decided to move away so that I would start sitting at a table by myself. Therefore, I felt like nobody really cared about me and I was in this by myself. I would also begin harming myself as well. Every night until March 8th, I harmed myself. And it came March. Oh boy, this is always a difficult month to talk about, and it all has to do with March 8th, the shittiest day of my life. This was the day that I actually came up with a plan to commit suicide, and then even attempted suicide. It was truly the worst day of my life, and I don't think I'll ever have a day like this. Now, talking about this day in Storytime 40 was incredibly hard, since it is a super sensitive subject for me. In fact, I leave out some information regarding the situation on purpose in Storytime because it is such a terrible situation. However, because I trusted these people so much and because I felt called to, I decided to mention the missing details from Storytime 40. I talked about things I wouldn't dare put into Storytime, such as how I harmed myself the night of March 7th, and even how I planned to kill myself. And then I talked about how I ended up surviving with my science teacher noticing stuff and how she got the help I needed. Overall, I think I did really well talking about this situation. In every story time where I've discussed it, being story times 10, 23, 28, and 40, I've always gotten super emotional when discussing the situation. You can easily tell by how soft and how serious my voice gets. This happens all the time when I talk about this situation. Ask anyone who's been through a similar situation as me, they'll probably sound the same. This happened when I was discussing it here, but I'm really proud of myself when I kept my voice loud. I tend to speak very loudly when presenting, and even though talking about March 8th, I still kept a loud and clear voice. Sure, I did sound a lot more serious, which is completely okay, but I still managed to speak up, which I am very proud of myself for doing. Anyways, for the mental hospital stay, I didn't really talk about it that much. Like, I talked about getting there, going through the program, and other stuff, but I just skimmed over it. But what I focused on intently was Monday, March 12th. So that night, my parents came to visit me, but because they were late and stuff, we just spent the visitation period cracking jokes and making fun of one another. This is actually what cured me of depression, as I felt loved, which is something that I had not felt in a long time. Like I always do when I talk about the situation, I ended up becoming like a lot more energetic and happy afterwards. I had talked about being discharged, well returning to school and stuff. And then came the longest part of the presentation, that being getting saved and the events that happened afterwards. I talked about a church event called DNOW 2018. This is a weekend church event that took place from April 13th to 15th. Now this was the night of April 14th. We had a speaker give us a lesson. I don't remember what he exactly said, but after hearing what he said, I felt a grudge in my heart that was like, do it, and so I did. I made the greatest decision I've ever made and will ever make in my entire life, giving my life to Christ. I did talk about how it felt and what was going through my mind during this time. I know a lot of people like to claim that God isn't real and stuff, and I know a few of y'all probably think that yourselves, but let me tell y'all something. The feeling you get when you give your life to Christ is something supernatural. Like, it is a feeling so great that you cannot even describe it in words, and you can't even compare it to like other experiences. That's why I know God is real. I experienced Him enter my heart. Nothing compares to that feeling. I then jumped a little bit and talked about my baptism. I actually found a video of it when my mom recorded, so I actually played it for everyone. Just like how everyone at church clapped when I was risen out of the water, everyone at Campus Bible Fellowship also clapped with them, which I thought was really cool. Afterwards, I talked about how accepting Him has transformed my life. I first talked about finishing 8th grade as well as being accepted into early college. I had talked about graduating early from early college. It was also here that I mentioned that I was only 17 years old and I was already a junior in college. I had talked about challenges. Now, the walk with God is amazing, don't get me wrong, but throughout your walk with God, you will face trials and tribulation. As 1 Peter 2:21 says, just like how Jesus suffered, you too will suffer. But then James 1:12 says that those who persevere through trial and tribulation are awesome. When I was doing research for this presentation, I thought those two verses back to back were super interesting, so I included both of them. Anyways, I brought up two trials I've had to face since I gave my life to Christ. The first one was my friend who passed away in November of 2020. This was probably the second most difficult trial I've ever had to face in my life, only behind of course my depression and suicidal thoughts. We were so close friends and then he died, which hurt a ton. However, thanks to God's mercy on me, I was able to persevere through this and managed to come out of it good with the birth of Storytime. The other was a much more complex one, that being moving into college. It was complex because it was something I was still working on while presenting this. However, I said that I trusted the Lord to guide me through and to help me transition to this new lifestyle, and sure enough, He has. I then closed out the presentation by thanking the pastor as well as the group for letting me present, and then I thank God for finding me and for guiding me through the difficult times, and that's where it ended. I think overall, this was a super successful presentation of my testimony. I'd say my biggest strength for this was focusing more on getting saved and talking about God has helped me rather than focusing on my life before depression. After all, this was a presentation on how I came to know Christ, not how I tried to kill myself. I think I did a great job on keeping on topic and putting God at the focal point of the discussion, so that was a success. Now, being the beginning of March, it was of course spring break. So for those not familiar with college schedules, spring break is in early March for whatever reason, not April. So I had March 7th to March 11th off. I of course spent the entire week at home, unfortunately working on calculus homework. Of course, as stated before, my calc professor assigned us homework over spring break, which was completely ridiculous because that completely defeated the purpose of a break, but I struggled through the assignments and got them done. In fact, understandably, I was one of the few who did the assignments. Our professor that Monday after break was very upset at everyone for not doing them. But I mean, ain't nobody want to do math homework when they're in Florida. I wasn't in Florida, so I did them. But even though I didn't do anything too exotic, I still had a lot this break, such as that Tuesday, which was the 8th. Of course, a pretty difficult day for me, like it is every year, but I really didn't let my thoughts of the events from 4 years before affect me. In fact, I decided to celebrate. Obviously not celebrating the fact that I tried to kill myself, but celebrating me being 4 years self-harm free, as well as celebrating the progress and maturity that I have attained since then. That's what I was celebrating. To celebrate, I also bought some pizza and wings for my family for dinner that night. It was a great dinner, and my family was very thankful and just as appreciative as I was. Everyone was happy that day. The next day would also be a good day. I woke up at 7:30 in the morning that day to go out for breakfast with my grandmother. We ate at a local country breakfast restaurant. It was great, and we both had a really good conversation about college and stuff. Then that Friday, I got to meet up with Lucas and Jackson, two of my friends back from early college. We went fishing together, and it was a ton of fun. Overall, minus the calculus homework, I had a fun spring break. So let's talk about returning to college. So normally, I would pack my stuff up in my truck and head on out. However, Dad came with me. The reason is because both of us were going to watch a baseball game together, so that's what we did. I packed some stuff in my truck while he packed the rest in his car, and we put my stuff in my room. My roommates had not returned yet, so it was just me and Dad unloading my stuff. Afterwards, we walked over to the baseball field and watched the game. We were playing Appalachian State. The game ended up going into the 12th inning, which is a ton for a baseball game. And unfortunately though, we lost. But it was still a fun game to watch nonetheless. So then let's move on to the next day. First day after spring break. Everyone, myself included, was pretty tired. Well, even though calculus was still fresh in my mind, for everything else, my mind was on a completely different planet. So for Western history and business, my mind was still blank. After starting this day, our college finally went mask optional, so we didn't have to wear one anymore, which I was happy about. I've always thought that COVID was exaggerated a lot by the media. On top of that, I personally am not scared at all from COVID. I'm healthy, I'm fully vaccinated, and I had COVID right before moving into college, so I don't really have much concern about COVID, and I don't think there's really a need for me to wear a mask. Now that doesn't mean I don't think masks should be banned or something. I think that if someone wears one, that's their choice. I don't judge people for wearing one because that's their health decisions. I think it's wrong to force someone to wear one, but I also think it's wrong to force someone not to wear one. While I'm not political, I do believe that the government should have no control over mine or anyone's daily lives. I should live how I want to without the government dictating what I can or cannot do. So that's why I do not support mask requirements, although I do support choice. However, being a public university, there were some people who were pretty radical in their beliefs about this. There were particularly a lot of students who were incredibly upset about the removal of the mask requirements. Like it went as far as there being protests on campus arguing to bring back the mask requirement. Yeah, these people are crazy. Like I get you want to wear a mask, and I respect that, that's your choice. But why do y'all want to force others to do the same? Just because masks are no longer required doesn't mean that you can't wear one. In fact, in the announcement regarding the removal of the requirement, the university still recommends wearing one. And by the way, that was an actual belief by these people. People genuinely thought that the university was banning masks. I wish I could say I was being satirical, but there were people who actually thought that we were no longer allowed to wear masks. I don't know where they got that from, but the announcement very clearly said in bold words that the masks are still highly recommended. So I don't know. If you ask me, I think that we as a society should be more afraid of the lack of critical thinking and reasoning in this generation than COVID, because this does not look good. Now, the reason I bring this up isn't to make a political statement or anything. It actually has to do with Western history. As stated before, my professor had some pretty strong beliefs on politics, and to no surprise, he went on a rant about it. He also made some pretty bogus claims. Probably the most ridiculous one was that he said that anyone who disagrees with Dr. Fauci disagrees with science. Yeah, the same guy who performed cruel and unusual experiments on innocent and defenseless dogs. As a pet owner myself, I do not trust a single thing that damn animal abuser says, including Mr. Science himself, because anyone who abuses animals should not be in this position. They should be in jail. Now another thing too is that he said that we who did not wear masks believe that Trump is apparently the second coming of Christ. I had to try so hard not to laugh after he made this statement. Like, I'm not wearing a mask, but as stated, I don't really care about politics. I don't care about Trump. I just care about living my life normally without the government intervening in my life. But this man thought that because I'm not wearing a mask and I'm automatically a far-right extremist or something. After a while, he stated that he started to get really frustrated with us because nobody was adding to the discussion. Even those that agreed with him didn't speak up. While I would have loved to have gone up to him and told him to teach the class rather than go on a rant, I stayed silent because my grade was in his hands. He could at any moment fail me if he wanted to, so I stayed quiet. Now, because of his frustration, he did probably the worst thing he could have done. So that really attractive girl who sat in front of me was called on by our professor at random. He asked her what she thought about the whole thing. She was pretty quick to say that she didn't really have any opinions on politics and that she didn't really care. This angered our professor. He then told her that she needed to start getting more involved in politics and stuff, and that anyone who isn't political is destroying our nation and stuff. Just a bunch of bullshit that came out of his mouth. Of course that girl was very pissed off. After all, she just called out in front of the class just because politics doesn't interest her. So it really sucked for her. And I felt really bad. However, we'll see on Wednesday that I'm actually going to do something about that. I'll talk about that once we get there. Anyways, after class, I just went on to the dining hall and ate breakfast. I went to the library just hang out with my friend for a bit. Then came business. So for this class, we talked about goal setting. The reason is because for our second PFS paper, we had to basically set SMART goals. SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time. So in this paper, we had to write down 10 SMART goals. They could either be short-term goals or long-term goals. However, we did have to actually write about 5 of them. 10 is a lot, so I'll go ahead and explain each of the 5 goals, and I got a cough now. Okay. The first one was to obtain my degree in accounting in May 2024. At the time, I was not considering an economics minor, so that was not listed. It's a very rudimentary goal that everyone has probably had on theirs as well. I want to finish school in 2 years and go off to work, more on that later. The next one is a little bit personal, and that's making friends who will encourage me and support me. So as stated multiple times throughout the story time, it was a lot harder for me to make friends than other college students, as I couldn't join clubs due to my age. I am also just shy in general, so I couldn't make friends, causing me to be pretty lonely throughout this first 10 weeks of college. But my goal here was to try to make friends before the end of the semester. Thankfully, I would actually make friends, so I did end up reaching that goal. The third goal is something that will be extremely prevalent in the story time I talk about my second semester in college, and that is guiding my friends from early college who are coming to my school and helping them transition. I've already been helping them out and stuff, with letting them know what everything is, as well as helping them out with housing. By the way, housing is going to be a huge conflict that I'll discuss when we get to April, so keep that in mind. My fourth goal was another goal that I had met this semester, and that being learning how to live on my own. Before this, the longest amount of time I had ever been away from home would have been when we went to Florida for a week and a half back in 2014. And that was with my parents. The longest I've ever gone without my parents before moving to college would have been huge. That was June 18th to June 23rd of 2018. And for college, while I did come home every weekend, I didn't start doing that until February. On top of that, it wasn't just some one-time thing either. I was away from them for a week at a time, which was a lot, but I got used to it. I also think I handled the initial wave from home thing pretty well. A lot of guys who go off to college tend to act super immaturely and do a bunch of stuff they wouldn't do otherwise. I seem to have kept my maturity, and although I did do some things I wouldn't have done at home, like walking around campus at 2 AM or just casually driving without asking, I still acted the same way I would have acted at home and handled it pretty well. It was just others who did not act like me that made it kind of difficult. The fifth and final goal was a really long-term goal, and that is being a certified public accountant, or CPA. I particularly want to go into forensic accounting, which I think would be cool. Although really I'm more interested in tax accounting now. But I think I really want to get my CPA one day. So that was the last goal. So that was what I talked about in my second PFS paper. The hardest part was definitely coming up with the goals. Because we humans are so good at making goals unconsciously, it becomes difficult for us to make them consciously. So that was kind of difficult to do. But once I had my goals, it became really easy and I ended up making 100 on this, so it worked out perfectly. So typically, after business, I go back to my room, which is what I did. However, when I went back, I saw something a little bit peculiar. So one thing I brought with me to school was my gaming chair. I used it in place of the mundane office chair we were provided with. So outside the room, I heard some really loud music, particularly a really loud guitar. When I entered the room, I saw my roommate was playing his guitar, except he was sitting on my chair. While I personally don't mind him using my chair, It would have been extremely awkward if I caught him using it. Thankfully, he never heard me coming in because his guitar was so loud, so he didn't realize I was in the room, so I just went back outside and bought Bojangles. And when I came back, he was gone, so at least I could eat my Bojangles in peace. But yeah, that happened. A couple hours later, I had calculus, so the assignments that were due over spring break had a participation score less than 30%. This meant that less than 30% of the students did the assignments. Our professor was incredibly mad. He just went off about why we need to take the class more seriously and why just because we don't have class, we still have assignments to do. It was just pathetic. Like, even in the workforce, my future boss isn't going to ask me to do something on the day or week that I'm taking a vacation day. If our professor was complaining about anyone, he should have complained about himself, because this was all on him. He shouldn't have assigned work over spring break knowing that the majority of students were going on vacation or somewhere. This rant went on for the first half of the class. Afterwards, he moved on and told us the material, so at least this didn't go on for the entire class just like my Western History professor did earlier regarding masks. The next day, being Tuesday, nothing happened, so let's move on to Wednesday, March 16th. Starting off with Western History, so I did something after class that I thought I would have never do, that being approaching a girl. So up to this point, I had never seen a girl by herself. Every girl I had seen on campus was with a friend. By the way, to any girls watching this video who are in search of a boyfriend, my advice is to be by yourself. A guy will never ever approach you if you're with a friend. Anyways, the girl who sat in front of me was by herself, so I decided that now was my time to talk to her, and I did. We mostly just talked about the class, as well as complained about our professor. Remember, this was the girl that was called out by our professor for not being political, so I think me sharing the same views on our professor made her feel very secure and very welcoming. And I did learn that her name was Alyssa and that she was a social work major. I also told her my major and my name, and I was an accounting major. That's all that I got from talking to her, as she had class right after that, but that made my entire day. The next day, the 17th, I had my second geology exam, so it was back to exam time. I felt that the timing of the exam could have been a little better, as having it right after spring break was a little unfair since the material wasn't on anyone's mind, so that kinda sucked, but it was still online and stuff, so that was a plus. Unfortunately, I didn't do so hot on it. I ended up making a 66 on it, but looking back on it, I think I still did really well. The class average was a 57, and of course the material wasn't fresh in my mind, so I think I did alright. Now I also want to go back to my roommate for a little bit. I particularly want to talk about something funny and just incredibly stupid that he did. So for whatever reason, he decided that it was a good idea to cook a sandwich in the microwave. Yeah, my man cooked a sandwich in a microwave. What was he thinking? On top of that, he ended up burning the sandwich. The microwave built up smoke and the fire alarm went off. The police then had to come over and fix the stuff. And then we were back in our rooms. Still, really? A sandwich in the microwave? Come on. Now that Friday, Alyssa was not in Western History, so it's just a typical day without her. But the next week, she came, so we taught some more, mostly just clobbering our professor in his quote-unquote teaching style. Now, me and Alyssa would pretty much talk throughout the rest of March and April. I would go on to learn that she was a junior who transferred from a community college, so she was actually similar to me in that sense. Although she did community college after high school, so she was probably like 21 or something. I never told her my age, since I knew that I would be a big turnoff, but I did mention I was a junior and I also transferred. So, that was happening. So for the next couple weeks, the month of March was rather plain. Nothing really happened. So let's talk about March 30th. So on this day, I had my second calc exam. It was a really hard exam, as some material we had just learned that I wasn't too familiar with on it, so it was a pretty difficult test. However, I still managed to make a 74 on it. Even though it was a C, which I tend to not like C's, I was still really happy with this grade. The class average was a 53, so I did a lot better than the average. So now let's talk about April. So I have a ton to talk about regarding this month. Let's get into it. So first off, I want to talk about my mental state. So in late March, my seasonal depression ended, so I mentally did very well this month, as well as in May. On top of that, April is generally a really good month for me. Unfortunately, even though I was really happy mentally, this month really sucked. Let's get into it. So let's start off with April Fool's Day. This was a Friday, so after Western History, I was ready to go home, so I started packing and stuff until suddenly, I locked my keys in my truck. I always lock my truck in between trips because I knew if I left my truck unloaded, some dumbass was going to steal my stuff. But this time, I left my keys there. To make matters worse, my room keys was attached to my truck via a keychain, so I had no way of going back to my room, so I was stuck. Luckily, Joseph and Delaney were passing by. They said hello to me and saw me waiting outside my truck. They asked if anything was up and I told them that the whole story. They felt really bad and offered to unlock my room for me, which I took up, so for the rest of the afternoon, I stayed in the room. So pretty much what happened was that I called my mom letting her know what happened. She got me through the stuff. Unfortunately though, because traffic that night was going to be terrible, they couldn't just drive up to my school and give me a spare key. So what might have had to happen was that they would have had to come up the next morning. So I'd have to spend the night there in my room without any food or anything. But fortunately, Mom proposed a different solution, and that is getting in contact with the campus police. So that's what they did. On my ID card that the school gave me, they actually have useful phone numbers, and I was able to call them asking for help and stuff. And then they came, and they were able to unlock my truck. The reason they were able to do so was by using this tool to have my truck open slightly, and then roll down the window. My windows rolled down manually, like you have to use a lever to roll down the windows. So we were able to do that, and they were able to unlock the truck manually. And that's how you unlock the truck. And then I was able to get my keys, and all was good. I thanked the officers for helping me, and I finished packing my stuff and went home. Now, going home though was insane. So my mom advised me to not take the interstate. Not only was it rush hour, but there was a really bad wreck. So I had to take highways to get home, which wasn't a big deal, as I knew how to get back on my home without using the interstate. The problem though was that the highway I was on had a ton of traffic. Like, a ton of traffic. I guess people had the same thought process as Mom. However, Mom said that the traffic was only bad for one part of the interstate. When I drove over an exit 30 minutes from that part, I saw a ton of cars backed up. Yeah, apparently the traffic was even worse than what Mom said, so taking the highways was definitely the right call on Mom's part. So let's move on to talk about business. So we did our third and final PFS paper in early April. This paper was an inquiry. An inquiry is kind of like a treasure hunt, except instead of traveling the 7 seas, you're traveling sites such as Google Scholar as well as our college's database. This treasure is a newly acquired information. So basically, we were asked to discover information related to business in this paper. These directions were extremely confusing and I had very little knowledge of what to do at first, but as I studied the directions more and more, I came to realize what exactly I was doing. We had to ask 5 questions regarding our topic and provide answers to them using an academic study for each question. Now, we were allowed to use any business topic of our choice, so I could have done one on accounting. However, my biggest issue with that is that literally nobody writes academic journals on accounting. Accounting is firm. It's not biology or chemistry, where new discoveries can just be made by doing experiments or testing hypotheses. No, accounting is discrete. What it is what it is. Outside of maybe technique or something, you can't change accounting or make a new discovery. No, it's always going to be that way and will always be that way. And sure enough, when I tried to find accounting studies, I had no luck, so that was going to be difficult. To combat this, I decided to go on Discord and explain the assignment to some friends. I then asked them to pick what field I should go for. They said that I should go for economics. I had never really thought about economics until this point. Like, I knew I had to take micro and macro. I'm actually taking micro right now, and it's a lot of work, but it's very fun. But I had never thought about doing research on economics. But I did know that there were probably a lot of studies dealing with economics, particularly macroeconomics. So that's what I decided to do for my inquiry. The first part on the paper was actually explaining what an inquiry is and how the process works. Nothing too special. I then introduced the topic of the inquiry, of course being economics. I first discussed the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics. Basically, macroeconomics is economics on a large scale, generally on a regional, national, or international level. It deals with things like GDP, monetary and fiscal policy, and inflation and deflation. Microeconomics is on a small scale, generally on a corporate group or individual level. It deals with things like elasticity, utility, price discrimination, and that stuff. In this inquiry, I asked questions regarding both disciplines. My first question was, how has the COVID-19 pandemic and working from home impacted small businesses? My second question was, what does the GDP say about a nation's overall standard of living? My third was about how macroeconomics and microeconomics intertwine with one another. My fourth was about how the GDPs of nations with command economies differ from nations with market economies. And my final question was how geography impacted a region's economy. For each of these questions, I had to find an academic study to provide an answer to each of them. I did it for all of the questions except the one about microeconomics and macroeconomics intertwining. For it, I used a peer-reviewed essay by multiple economists from Austria, so that still made up since it was still a very reliable source. Anyways, I had a ton of fun writing this paper. I developed a big interest in economics, and now I was considering pursuing a minor in it. So yeah, this paper was very successful. I also made a 100 on it, so it was only increased my interest even more. So now let's talk about something that ultimately would make this month really bad. So while at home, I applied for housing for the 2022-2023 school year. That also helped me in applying. On the housing application, you have to select 8 different options. Yeah, 8. That's a lot, but me and Dad still select them and chose the best options. The first 2 choices involved me having my own room and bathroom. The middle 4 involved me having my own room but sharing a living room and a bathroom with one other person. And the bottom 2 were me having my own room but sharing a bathroom and living room with 2 other people. Me and Dad were both very happy with these selections, and this would mean me getting up my own privacy as well as not having to share a room with someone who never cleaned their room. Unfortunately, the next day, HRL decided to just be complete assholes. What they gave me was a 1-room dorm where I shared a room with someone and had a community bathroom and shower in a freshman-only dorm. This is literally the exact opposite of what I asked for. In fact, I seriously don't think housing even looked at my application. They just assigned me somewhere random, and the worst place they could have placed me as well. My first thought on this was, how the hell did they even place me here? Like, I wasn't an incoming freshman, I was a rising senior. What the hell were they thinking? Like, again, it was by how long we were students at the university and not by credit hours, but I shouldn't be eligible in the spring. I won't be a first year then. And it just being in a freshman-only dorm was equivalent to a death sentence. Freshman boys are the most immature people in the world. Most 5th graders act more mature than freshman boys. I get they're 18 and 19 and stuff, but maturity-wise, they act like they're 9. Even though I would still be younger than most of them, I still acted far older than all of them. Being a rising senior in college at only 17 years old doesn't take knowledge. It also requires maturity and self-control. That's honestly why I don't think I've never had many friends growing up. I've always been a few years ahead of everyone, so nobody wanted to be with me because I acted older than them. In fact, I think that's also honestly why the bullies bullied me in 8th grade. I was more mature than them, making me an outlier. I was different from everyone. So putting me in a freshman-only dorm was a complete disgrace and just downright terrible decision on HRL's part. Putting someone who acts like he's 5 years older with a bunch of people who act like they're 10 years younger is never gonna turn out well. Just watch Storytime 29 or 40. Those 2 demonstrate this idea better than any other one. But my problem isn't being in the same building, as that's manageable until they start setting off fire alarms and doing a bunch of other bullshit. The real issue is sharing a bathroom and shower. Taking a shit in a public bathroom is the most awkward and most embarrassing thing ever. Now combine this with doing it in front of a bunch of freshmen, who I've already established were extremely immature. Yeah, it wasn't gonna work out. To make matters even worse, there was an Instagram account that posted pictures of people's shoes while using the bathroom in the storm in particular. I tried reporting that account as much as I could, since to me, that was just so disrespectful and childish, but Instagram never did anything. So now I was at risk of being taken pictures of while using the bathroom. It sounds silly to be afraid of this, but considering they post twice a week, even though nobody would know, it would still be completely embarrassing as well as just plain rude of them. Anyways, you had the whole showering, too. Surprisingly, this was the least of my worries. The reason is because if you saw Storytime 41, you would know that I became an expert at taking public showers. And that super awkward interaction with that adult whom I'm glad I'll never ever see again, I learned how to properly take a public shower without being seen. Although I did have concerns regarding freshman boys being freshman boys and stuff, I knew that if I took a shower at the time the floor was the least populated, it would be very easy. But in my opinion, the worst part was not having my own room. This is what was the highest on my priorities. In fact, it wasn't that I wanted my own room. I needed my own room. After one painful experience sharing a room the spring 2022 semester, I wanted to be in a better spot and have my own room. But now I was going to have to share a room with some kid I didn't know. I never met him or even got in contact with him, and while he probably is pretty cool, I still had doubts and stuff. I mean, he had to be better than the roommate I had, but I was still very doubtful and scared. On top of that, the room we were sharing was even smaller than the room I shared in the spring 2022 semester. In fact, I wouldn't have even been able to bring my gaming chair because the dorms were so small. So I was also incredibly limited on what I could bring. The bed placements were also super inconvenient too, as I had nothing beside my bed. It seems really minor, but I wear glasses, so I have to have something like a nightstand or something beside my bed to set them down, because if I put things somewhere else, I'm going to spend the entire morning looking for them, and since I can't see without them. Now, although me and my roommate would have moved stuff, the room was so small that there were 2 of each stuff to accompany both of us. We would have been super limited anyway, so yeah, that sucked. Another thing too is just privacy as well as having a place by myself. I'm what you call an extreme introvert. It's not that I'm shy or that I prefer to be myself. No, it means that having time to myself is a requirement. Like if I don't have at least a little bit of time to myself, I develop sociopathic behavior. It's happened multiple times before when I've been in the presence of other people for too long periods of time, and it's never pretty. I also tend to get incredibly tired and out of breath. This happens especially after streaming. After playing some Pokemon Showdown or recording a story time, I tend to get so exhausted and tired that I just want to disappear from everyone for a few hours. That's why I tend to record story times at 11 p.m, as by the time I finish, nobody is awake. It's why although I do have a Twitch account, I don't stream, because I know that that it would completely drain me. And it also explains why I'm a night person, because it provides me time to be myself. If finding a place to be completely isolated on campus is also super difficult, even on the top floor of the library, where there were always 1 or 2 people there at any given time. So while I got lucky this semester with my roommate getting a girlfriend and stuff, I knew I wouldn't be so lucky this time, so I was screwed. Now, after seeing what I got, I called Dad and told him the unfortunate news. He was really disappointed to hear this, as he knew my needs and wants regarding housing. His advice was for the next day, I called up housing and tried to get it switched and stuff. However, Mom was with them, and she voiced her opinion on it. Now, something to know about my mom is that her personality is the exact opposite of mine. If she's not around people for at least some time, she's gonna grow sociopathic behavior herself. So for her, this was ideal housing. Even though she knows my personality and stuff, she didn't remember that. So when I was talking about it, Mom really was upset that I wasn't happy with it. Although another thing too is that Mom went to the same college, and this is where she roomed her first year. So she took offense to it whenever I said that was the worst possible outcome. But the thing is that we're completely different. This is why we often clash with one another. Not because I'm right and she's wrong, or she's right and I'm wrong, but because both of us fail to recognize and celebrate each other's difference. Now, I'm not trying to make a shit show out of Mom, because I do this myself with her. In fact, I'm a lot worse about it than Mom. But that's just something that both of us need to work on. But that's really the kind of why Dad is really easy to talk to and it's a good medium. He's an ambivert, meaning he's both an introvert and extrovert. I know you are watching this, Dad, and let me tell you, I am super jealous of your personality, because you can conquer the whole damn world with your personality. But Dad was really supportive of me and stuff, and provided advice regarding how to get better and stuff. He also said that I had 4 choices. The first choice was to deal with it. That would have been the one that I would have least likely have done, since I knew that there would be no way for me to survive this. The second choice was calling HRL. The next day, when asking them to look into this and changing my assignment. This would have been what I did, and I'll get to that later. The third was looking for off-campus housing. So finding an apartment nearby and finding roommates and stuff. I would get my own room and bathroom doing this, but it would require to getting a full-time job on top of coursework. Then the fourth was simply just canceling my housing assignment and commuting back and forth every other day. Driving back and forth would have been a pain, and I probably would have been more likely to skip class, but it was better than turning into a sociopath, so I had that. Mom was really wanting me to do choice 1, and Dad was even leaning towards choice 1, but I decided to do choice 2. Anyways, I woke up a little early the next day and called HRL. I explained to them the situation of my dissatisfaction with the housing assignment, and they were pretty unsympathetic. They were like, well, you could change your assignment in a few weeks and stuff like that, but it seemed like they didn't care much or wanted to cooperate. I didn't ask for the supervisor, but they said that she was in a meeting, which I understood. So after that, we ended it and it was a failure. That night, I called Dad and told him the results. He said that I might experience better results if I talked to them in person, so that's what I did that next day. But this is when I learned that they were even more insolent in person. So beforehand, I prepared a full list of questions to ask. This was a recommendation by Dad. He said that I should get in contact with the supervisor and talk to them. However, I never got the chance to ask these questions. So what happened was that I went to their front desk and told my name and the situation, and the lady working at the front desk was super uncooperative. She said the same thing they said on the phone, and I could wait a few weeks. I didn't ask if I could see her supervisor, since there was no way that supervisor was still in the meeting. You know what this lady told me? She said that the supervisor was too busy working on a project for LGBTQ students and would not be available till May. Yeah, her supervisor was completely unavailable during the month they received the most questions and complaints. That's failed leadership right there. I didn't ask if there was still any way I could change, and I also even threatened them by saying that if my assignment wasn't changed, I would not be living on campus next year and they would not receive any money. She told me about the housing change in May and stuff. She also incorrectly said that it was just 2 weeks away, and emphasized that. It was actually 4 weeks. I tried to ask more questions to see what I could do, but she then just said goodbye and told me to leave. I then left pretty angrily. So yeah, HRL at my college has some incredibly uncooperative and just downright disrespectful workers. Like again, I might be sounding like a male Karen, but you have to remember, the entire college is a business trying to make money. The school wants to make money, so that's their primary goal. I'm offering some pretty big bucks to them, and they're just being rude to me and not wanting to work with me. That's just incredibly unprofessional. Oh, and to make it even more dumber, I was offering to pay even by wanting my own room. I was talking about 1,500 more than the assignment they gave me, and they still didn't want to cooperate. Who the hell would turn down 1,500? Like, I get they get paid by the state since it's a public university, but the amount of students living on campus also goes towards their paycheck. I am paying them incredibly good money, all for them to treat me like this and be unprofessional? That's just ridiculous. I didn't call Dad that night and told him about it. He was pretty upset at HRL as well, but said that he was still proud of me because I did that and I really stood up for myself. He also said that very few people my age would have even had the balls to call HRL, nevertheless go there in person and duke it out. So while I still lost, it proved that I was more capable and determined than others my age. That kind of backs up my earlier point regarding why I should be in the freshman only dorm. But the only way I could get my room changed would be to do the room change in May. I'll get to that later on in the story time, but I'll go ahead and say that I ultimately had the last laugh. Now this situation, unfortunately, made the rest of this month suck. The whole situation was on my mind very frequently, and I didn't have a lot of time to break from it. I felt like I was completely chained to the situation. I wouldn't be able to escape it. There was no end. Luckily, as we'll see, there was an end, and it was one of the most satisfying endings to any conflict I've ever had in my whole life. So let's drift away from this to talk about Earth Science. So on April 5th, we had our second exam. The TAs did the same thing here. As the first exam, they made a Kahoot to help us study. We also could use a sheet of notes and stuff, so the odds were in my favor. And to no surprise, I did very well. I made an 86 on this exam. So yeah, I was really happy with this grade. Now, how about we revisit Campus Bible Fellowship, shall we? Firstly, let's talk about someone who knew who started attending these. So this was a girl named Claire. She was an education major. English was her second language. Her first language was French, as she's from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So she's pretty far away, although she lived in Concord, which is like just northeast of Charlotte, as well as just close to where I live as well. She told me about what life was like in Congo, and wow, it is awful. We've all heard about people starving in Africa and stuff, but as Americans, we truly don't understand it until we meet someone who has experienced that. She is, and it's truly awful what her people are going through. She was very lucky to have been able to move to the States, because here, she's able to attend college, get an education, and eat a proper diet and stuff. It truly is sad what goes on in our country of origin. As well, the Congo is an incredibly beautiful nation. It is filled to the brim with poverty and political unrest and corruption. While we certainly have our problems here in the US, I think the most important lesson I learned from her is that no matter how bad you have it, there's always someone who has it worse. That kind of reminded me of the housing situation. Even though I got something terrible that I didn't ask for, I couldn't just been completely rejected and told to screw off. So although I still stayed really mad at HRO and it haunted me for the rest of the month, I did at least have a little bit of a different perspective on it. And in other story times too, that's probably been someone who had something worse than me. Take Storytime 29, which is about Fuge. In that Storytime, I mathematically predicted that there was also a girl who got left out. I don't know her story or who she even is, but she might have been treated even worse than the boys in my grade, so I could have been worse off there. Anyways, me and Claire became really good friends. She was also a hugger, so we hugged a lot, and she needed hugs. I mean, we all do, but she needed those hugs more than anyone. I also got to see the return of Drew. Finally, after overcoming a ton of exams, he was able to start going back to Campus Bible Fellowship. I also got to introduce him to Claire, and then us three became friends, so we were really cool. Another thing too with Drew is that we started to hang out more outside Bible study, particularly the library. We hung out here every other day. This would be where I learned about the classes he was taking. So I learned that he was also taking calculus for business, just that he had a different professor. I had my third exam for the class on the 27th, so throughout the month we would both work on stuff together and would help each other out. Probably the best moment though was when we were studying definite integrals. So I manually solved definite integrals. It's long and super easy thing to mess up. However, I did not make any sense there, didn't I? Okay. Probably the best moment we had though was when we both were studying definite integrals. So manually solving definite integrals is long and is super easy to mess up. However, I managed to find a way to solve them using a calculator. After I did this for the first time, I was in total disbelief because I thought this was something I couldn't do on a calculator. To prove this, I did a problem on a calculator, but then I did the same problem manually. And sure enough, I got the same answer using both methods. I didn't show Drew. Needless to say that he was amazed. Right after proving to him that it worked, he was saying 4-letter words while I was dying laughing. After all, if we had done it, we officially broke calculus. I didn't show him how to do it and stuff, and he was just beyond belief. The best part for him was that he had not done the assignment his professor assigned regarding definite integrals, so he was able to just breeze through it. I had already done mine, which even though I was a little upset over, I still had at least happy to have found out because I could use it on both the third test as well as the final. It was also good for me to know how to do it manually, and I'll explain why it was good when I talk about the third test. I'll talk about the third test later, and so I still have a few more things to talk and discuss. However, I still want to touch on the third exam I took for Geology. So this was an exam that was formatted the same way as the other exams. However, for whatever reason, I found it a lot easier than exams 1 and 2. and my grades showed. I made an 89 on it. The class found it easier too, as the class average was a 71, and for those who had an attendance record of at least 50%, the average was an 82, so making this exam easier was definitely very nice for a professor. So we took this test on Thursday, April 21st. The next day, April 22nd, I would not actually go home. Instead, I would actually be going out of town. I'll talk about that, but firstly, I want to discuss Western history that day. So I've criticized this professor a lot throughout the story time. One of the reasons that I mentioned earlier was that he was really snarky and believed that he was smarter than everyone. But there was also another reason why I disliked him, which I learned here, but it would get worse for the rest of the class. So in class, he talked a little bit about the final. However, he was incredibly indirect about it. This confused me as well as everyone else. I was particularly confused about the part where he said that the final was going to be online, but attendance for the final was required, but not attendance wouldn't be taken. This heavily confused me. If attendance is mandatory, but it won't be taken, and we could take the final for a few days beforehand, why the hell did we still have to attend? What difference was that going to make? And the way he lectured us about it too made no sense and confused us all. So after class, I actually did something I had never done before, and that was approach a professor after class. While this did mean I didn't get to talk to Alyssa after class, I decided that it was worth it. And plus, we see in May where this is going to get a completely out of the park solution. Anyways, I asked him to clarify this, and he confused me even more. He also acted all snarky and stuff. Once again, I understand that he is probably smarter than I am. He's a professor. Professors tend to be incredibly smart people. But I felt like he was trying to exalt himself in such a way, like putting himself up me and me down, which I didn't like. I still stayed cool and respectful, which definitely helped, as he calmed down and actually started speaking assertively. He also asked for my name, which I told him. At first, I thought he was the only professor who knew my name, but as we'll see in May, there's also another professor who unexpectedly knew my name. Anyways, after talking with him, I went back to my room to pack, but not to go home. Instead, I was packing my stuff to go to Savannah, Georgia. We were going to go here for the weekend because my sister had a cheer competition. So how it worked was that my sister went down there with a friend Thursday night. So mom and dad just drove up to my school and picked me up there. I didn't put my stuff in the van and hopped in, and dad drove through South Carolina and into Georgia. I didn't sit in the front seat to help him with direction stuff since I'm an expert on this kind of stuff. Overall, it was a very smooth drive down there. However, I want to mention that driving on I-95 South in the Low Country, which is like the southeast region of South Carolina near Charleston. So while driving on 95 South, we saw 95 North, and oh my god, that traffic was backed up for miles upon miles. I-95 in both South and North Carolina is known for being a huge pain because it's a 2-lane interstate throughout most of the Carolinas. The only exceptions are when it becomes a 3-lane interstate in Florence, South Carolina, and Fayetteville, North Carolina. So because it goes through most rural parts of Carolinas, you'd expect there to not be many people to drive it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who use this interstate in the Carolinas. So many people that 2 lanes is just not enough. Therefore, the interstate is always in traffic, and what normally is a 2.5-hour trip is actually a 4-hour trip. Now, the same thing goes for I-26. Traffic is really bad all around, but it is just absolutely terrible in the Orangeburg area since that's where it meets I-95. Oh. However, southbound didn't have much traffic. We did get behind some slow drivers. In fact, when we were on I-26 in Lexington, which is directly south of Columbia, we saw someone going so slow that a truck carrying a mobile home passed them. Yeah, when a truck carrying a mobile home passes you, I think it's safe to say you are definitely going way too slow. Another funny thing too is that when we passed this guy going like only 50 miles an hour, I looked to see what he was doing. Now, I've heard of texting while driving, but this man wasn't doing that. He was lifting weights while driving. Me and my parents laughed when we saw this, as none of us had ever seen this before. By the way, just like how we say don't text and drive, don't lift weights and drive either. Anyways, we got into our hotel and settled down. The hotel we stayed in was actually in a place called Garden City, which is only 5 minutes drive from downtown Savannah. Anyways, after getting settled in, as well as my sister reuniting with us, we went to downtown Savannah. Now, I've been in multiple downtown areas. I've also driven a lot of busy downtowns such as Uptown Charlotte, downtown Asheville, and downtown Myrtle Beach, but I have never seen a downtown this lively and this crowded. Downtown Savannah is insanely busy. Luckily, Dad was driving, but just sitting there with him, I was still scared to death because it was so crowded. Luckily, we found a spot to park, and so we were able to explore downtown Savannah. We saw a lot of historical and important places in Savannah, such as the Forza Park, St. John's Cathedral, and Emmett Park. Anyways, it started to grow dark after a while, so we then went back to the room. Even though Savannah is very safe for a city its size, as its crime rate is actually below the national average, we still didn't want to risk anything, so we just headed back to our hotel room. The next day, I kinda had to wake up early. By early, I mean 8 o'clock. I went to bed at 10 though, so it was fine. But Mom and my sister had to go to cheer competition, and Dad had to take them, so I of course had to wake up. That morning was really just a lay around the room type deal. Dad got back, and he also brought Bojangles, and then we just hung out around them that afternoon when once Mom and my sister were done. Once they were done, we headed back to downtown. It was later afternoon, so it was even busier than the day before. Other than just simply walking around the bustling downtown, I don't remember much from this. And that night, we decided to eat a little cheaper and go and eat at a local Cracker Barrel. After all, we were in Georgia, and Cracker Barrels is like the most Georgia thing ever. We had a nice dinner, but I would really like to talk about a pretty funny moment with Mom and my waiter. So we were ordering our drinks, and you know, the typical. Then it was Mom's turn. When Mom said, "I'll take an iced water with no ice," that was when Mom said that she wants an ice water with no ice. Now, I've heard of an ice water with as well as ice with water without any ice, but I have never heard of an ice water with no ice. So me, my sister, Dad, and the waiter gave her a hard time about it. In fact, whenever our waiter mentioned Mom's water, he would always say ice water with no ice with it. Each time he said it, it would always get even more funny. So this is a nice but humorous dinner. So then the next day, being Sunday, April 24th, this was our last day in Savannah. Like the day before, Mom and my sister left in the morning, so it was just me and Dad. Unlike the day before, we decided to go somewhere. We particularly decided to go somewhere that most people who visit Savannah do, that being the beach. Being a coastal city, people want to go to the beach, so me and Dad went over to a beach city called Tybee Island, which is directly east of Savannah. Now, Georgia beaches are a lot different than the beaches of other states. Unlike South Carolina or Florida, the coastal cities of Georgia are a lot less commercialized and a lot less crowded. They kind of remind me of beaches back home in North Carolina. Outside of Wilmington and Elizabeth City, North Carolina beaches are not very crowded and aren't very populated. That's how Tybee Island was. We did get in a ton of traffic trying to get there, but that was because there was a wreck on a one-lane highway. The beach was not very crowded, like it was super easy for me and Dad to get around and find our place again. After a little bit, we headed back to Savannah and picked up Mom and my sister. Afterwards, we headed on our way back home. On our way back, we briefly stopped in the city of Walterboro, which is a city in the low country of South Carolina, about an hour west of Charleston. We just ate some Zaxby's and stuff. But afterwards, I took the wheel. I was going to drive the rest of the way home, and on top of that, I was not going to use a GPS since I memorized the entire route. Dad was very reluctant about it, but after persuading him, he agreed to let me drive, so I did. The first interstate I got back on, was I-95. As stated earlier, I-95 in the Carolinas is known for being a nightmare. Outside of Fayetteville and Florence, it's a two-lane interstate. Therefore, the traffic is incredibly easy to build up. That's what happened here. Walterboro to I-26 is normally a 30-minute drive. However, I was on I-95 for over 50 minutes because of how bad the traffic was. Like, Dad showed me how to use cruise control, but I barely used it for more than 30 seconds till it got onto I-77 in Columbia. I'll get there in a bit. Anyways, after a little while on 95, I reached the intersection with 26, so I got on it. Immediately following me was a ton of traffic. I ended up being stuck on I-26 for a very long time. What normally was a 45-minute drive to I-77 ended up being a 1.5-hour drive because traffic was so bad. Interestingly, the traffic was bad near the start, but as time progressed, it got better. In fact, by the time I reached Lexington County, the traffic started to speed up, which is weird because Lexington County is directly south of Columbia, but considering that it becomes a 3-lane interstate here, I guess that makes sense. Then I reached I-77. This was by far the easiest part of the trip, which to me is hilarious because here in Charlotte, we always complain about 77 traffic being so bad, particularly in South and Uptown Charlotte. But I-77 the whole way, even through Charlotte, was actually really good. It did get a little crowded in Rock Hill, but the addition of a 4th lane made it much more manageable. So yeah, I got to drive for a long distance. Even though I got into a ton of traffic, it was still really fun, and I definitely want to do more long distance driving in the future. Just gotta give her those damn gas prices though. Anyways, made it back, time to tackle the rest of the school year. So let's jump a little bit to Wednesday, April 27th. So this was the day that I took my 3rd exam for calculus. However, this exam would give me a 5th reason to not like my professor. Now, as stated before, he got better after spring break. He started assigning less homework and wasn't as stingy as he was before spring break. But the test, he decided to switch up and give the entire formula for how we gave tests. What he did was that he would grade our work, not just our answer. If we got the answer right, but our work was wrong, the entire problem would be counted wrong, and vice versa. My trig professor back in 11th grade was like this, but at least she did it for every exam we took. With my calc professor, he just decided to completely switch his entire style near the end of the semester. And he didn't warn us either. If he at least told us he would do this, I wouldn't have complained. But he had said before that he was given our test and that this was how it was going to be graded. Just completely uncalled for. Now, why did he do this? Well, he said he wanted to prevent cheating. Cheating! He realizes that the class average on the second exam was a 53, right? I would have understood his suspicion if the class was a 75 or even a 70, but a 53? Really? So why the hell did he suspect cheating? And if someone did cheat, why was he punishing the entire class for it? The audacity of this professor was just, ugh. But I mean, he wasn't as bad as my Western history professor, so I'll give him that. Anyways, that meant doing definite integrals on a calculator was no use. I had to show my work. Well, actually, it was still useful because it allowed me to check my work. And the two definite integral problems he gave us were pretty simple, so I was easily able to do them manually. So that was that. I ended up making only an 84. I was really disappointed since I understood this material really well, but at least I wouldn't make this up by completely blowing the final exam out of the water. More on that later. I also want to talk about Alyssa for a little bit. So I believe the day of the calculus final, I was just sitting in my room laying around. I got bored, so I went on GroupMe for no particular reason. I normally access it via the message app from my phone. However, one thing I learned is that direct messages via GroupMe are not accessible through iPhone messages. I noticed this because I saw Alyssa send me a direct message asking me if I knew what we were doing in the class that day. She sent this on March 18th, which would have been 2 days after we met. At first, I was kind of embarrassed because God never responded to a message, but after a couple seconds, I got really excited. It meant that she remembered me. For some reason, particularly among girls, I tend to think that they just forget about me and who I am unless I talk to them or they don't really care much about me. I know that's not the case, as I know they are going to remember me, but I always think I've forgotten. But her reaching out to me even though it was a month beforehand was a huge turn on for me. So I had two options. I could either disregard the message and completely forget that she messaged me, or I could respond explaining that I hadn't seen her message till then. I decided to do the second option, and I think it was a good choice. A little bit after I messaged her, she responded and we started talking. She also mentioned something really unfortunate happened that week prior. So she plays volleyball, and so while playing volleyball, she ended up falling and she broke her ankle. Now that she was laying around in an apartment all day since she couldn't move, she also sent me a picture of it, and yeah, it looked bad. Thankfully, it wasn't terrible, as she said the doctors were expecting her to have a pretty speedy recovery, and I wished her one. I also told her the story about how I broke both my arms when I was 13, which that's Storytime 36 in case you'd like to hear that story yourself. She found it really funny, which was the goal of telling her the story. It also made her feel a little better knowing that she didn't do something completely ridiculous like jumping over a tennis net. So that definitely cheered her up a little bit. Now, to show that I cared about her and stuff, I messaged her about every day following this group via GroupMe, just trying to make sure she was alright and getting better regarding her leg. And I could tell that she was really appreciating it, as she always seemed to feel better and better the more I talked to her. I knew this would make her feel better, because about a week after I broke my arms, my friend Aki and his family came over to visit me. Them coming over meant so much to me, so I knew someone looking out for her meant a lot to her. Then on Friday, April 29th, I went home for the first time in 2 weeks, which felt really nice. However, this weekend, I didn't really rest, so on May 3rd, that next Tuesday, I had the opportunity to take my Earth Science final a week early. I plan to do this so I can move out on Saturday, May 7th, and not the following Thursday. But there was a catch to this. The catch was that the TAs would not have a Kahoot ready by then. Therefore, I decided to make a point to create not one, not two, but 3 Kahoot sets for me and the rest of the class so we could all study before taking it on the 3rd. And wow, these Kahoots were massive and took a lot of work to create. The first one had 57 questions, the second one had 100, and the third one had 67. It took me a total of 10 hours to make these 3 Kahoots. I even stayed up all night on April 30th. So yeah, it was hard, but I got them done and even got them sent in the GroupMe chat for the class. I immediately became really popular in the class just for that. So although I spent an obnoxiously long time working on it, I got it done so as well as the rest of the class could study. So let's move on to May. So May 2022 was an interesting month to say the least. The first half of it was absolutely incredible, but the second half was absolutely awful. For the sake of the story time, I'll only be talking about the first half of the month. Anyways, let's talk about the week of May 1st to May 7th, because holy shit, this was quite possibly the best week of 2022, if not my entire life. Yeah, this week was that good. So let's first talk about Monday, May 2nd. So this was a really big day because it was the day that I had the chance to change my housing assignment. Not bad, this was a really good day. So that's what I did. I woke up at 8:45, got my computer out, and got on the housing site to change my assignment. However, there was a big issue. So I was not the only one wanting to change my housing assignment. I was actually one of over 3,000 students trying to change their housing assignment. Yeah, HRL screwed up that bad. So because of this, we ended up crashing the HRL server. At the time, I was furious because it would mean less spots available for something I wanted. Looking back on it, it's kind of a hilarious because it was a told you so moment to HRL. They messed up over 3,000 students' housing assignments, and now their server was being destroyed, so yeah, HRL played themselves. But after 30 minutes, I was able to get into the portal. I was so scared and shaking so bad, but then a miracle happened. I was looking around the options available, and sure enough, right in front of my eyes, there's a 2-person, 2-bedroom option upperclassman for me. In fact, that was actually my third choice on my housing application. I immediately selected it and secured it, and then that was the very moment I clicked change assignment. I had done it. All of the stress and fear that came from the situation HRL put me through, gone. I did it. I beat HRL. I had the last laugh. I truly felt like I was on the top of the world. Even though this situation seems really silly to get excited over, remember my personality. I would have became a fucking sociopath had I been in a freshman only dorm sharing a room with someone. Although I probably would have lived off campus or commuted. Therefore, this whole situation was an incredibly huge burden on me. So it being lifted and me getting something that I wanted felt absolutely incredible. So let's talk about this new assignment for a little bit. So this was a suite, unlike the assignment HRL gave me, which was a dorm. So in this suite, how it works is that I will share the suite with one other person. We will share a living room and a bathroom, but we will each have our own rooms. This provides a ton of privacy as well as gives me a space that I can be alone. On top of that, the bathroom actually makes sense. Instead of a separate door for the toilet, sink, and shower are all in the same room. On top of that, the bathrooms actually look really nice and unlike the bathroom I had this semester or that in the freshman only dorm. And to make things even better, each floor has a community kitchen and the building is much closer to the business building than the freshman only dorm. So yeah, this was a better housing assignment in almost every way. So after calming down a bit, I texted my parents letting them know the good news. Dad was thrilled. He was really happy and congratulated me and stuff. Mom was at first incredibly emotionless and kind of oblivious since I wasn't doing what she wanted to do, but after I told her that I'm putting her in charge of decorating my room, she started getting hyped up and is now really happy for me with this placement. By the way, Mom has a hobby of decorating. She's also really good at it, too. Over the past year, she's been decorating the living room, and it looks better every day. I was going to let her decorate my side of the room back in January, but we both decided not to do that after seeing my roommate's side with his weed posters. Considering we had intentions on putting up this one thing with an inspirational quote and then a couple others with Bible verses, yeah, probably would have not been a good idea to combine heaven and hell into one. So we didn't bother, and that was definitely a good decision. To make things even better for Mom, there's an IKEA near the college, so we could go over there and turn my room into a PewDiePie fan club or something if we want. In fact, now that I think about it, I might put up a PewDiePie approved meme this August, or a big PP meme as he calls it. Anyways, I was so happy with my placement. It basically set the mood for the week. However, I wasn't the only one working with housing though. Cooper was also trying to work with housing, although his situation was a little different. He was able to get into a 4-person, 4-bedroom suite with 2 of his friends. However, he was trying to get another one of his friends in, although with how bad the server was that day, he was having difficulty. I'm not sure if he was able to get it, but if he has, then congratulations. If not, he still has it until August. We were both talking about it. He said his laptop trying to work on and stuff while I was walking in circles in the living room since I was just so excited I couldn't sit in place. I didn't head on to the library as I promised Drew that I'd help him with his calc homework. So that's what I did. Me and Drew tackled his homework and stuff. I also told him the good news about what happened earlier, which he was very celebratory for. He's not living on campus next year, so he didn't have to worry about housing assignments and stuff. Now, although this was a great day, the greatness did not stop there. The next day was also a really good day. However, it started off really bad. So of course, being May 3rd, I took my Earth Science final. I studied so much using my Kahoots and other resources, so I was super confident about the exams. However, taking my time on the exam and feeling rather confident, I clicked submit. I then saw my score, an 83. Now at first this sounds fantastic. However, I was extremely perturbed. I needed an 88 to make an A in the class, and I was just 2 questions shy of it, so I was upset. So I walked out of my room outside of the room, upset that I was making an 89.3 in the class. I then hooked up my laptop and monitor and decided to just check my email. That was when a miracle happened. So my Earth Science professor noticed that I was rather upset, and so she looked at my grade and saw that I was just short of an A. So she emailed me explaining how the exam was going to be graded. This completely shocked me, since I didn't even think she knew my name. Well, I guess she did. Anyways, it was going to be curved by at least 2 questions. On top of that, My score included 3 extra credit questions, so my actual score was slightly higher before the curve. But to make things even better, she promised that if after the curve and my grade wasn't an A, she would bump my grade to an A because I had perfect attendance and took the class seriously throughout the semester. This email shot my mood through the roof. I went from being really upset to being just as happy and energetic as I was the day before when I switched my housing assignment. I replied to her email thanking her for doing so, to which she replied with "you're welcome" and a couple other comments. Yeah, I was beyond relieved reading her email. Earth Science, as stated before, was the hardest class I took this semester, so making an A in this class felt really awesome. Now, the day we were supposed to actually take the exam was the 12th. This was the time the university provided for us to take it. Therefore, since only about a quarter of us took it on the 3rd, the test wasn't curved nor were the extra credit added until then. But it didn't really scare me too much since my professor promised to give me an A, so I didn't bother. I did at least get to see my actual grade on the final, which ended up being a 94. Yeah, that was higher than the first and second test. I guess the class just didn't do so well, as my grade would normally have been only curved by 2 or 3 points at an 83. But I ain't complaining at all. I was really happy with this. This also put my final grade at a 91, so I was really happy. So then let's move on to the next day. So this was reading day. The last day of classes was the day before, being the day of my Earth Science final. So this day was allocated for us to study for finals. The University Center for Academic Excellence also provided tutoring for a certain number of classes. One of those classes was a calculus, so I attended that. It wasn't anything too special. We basically had a doctorate student work out problems and explain them. I thought he did a good job, as it helped refresh topics that I may have forgotten about at the beginning of the semester. However, around the middle of the session, I checked my phone. I particularly went on GroupMe, as I saw some notifications, but the first notification I saw was what stuck out the most. It was a direct message from Alyssa. The message said, "Call me," and she listed her phone number. When I saw this, I was completely baffled. I had never even asked for her number, and she just flat out gave it to me. I was in shock. I might as well have won the lottery. If your crush gives you out their number without you asking, you pretty much won at life. So I excused myself from the tutoring session and called her. She answered and we started talking. So we talked about an assignment that our professor assigned. Well, it was actually a review he did on our last day of class. I did not attend that day because I was working on changing my housing assignment. Alyssa also glaringly couldn't attend due to her ankle. However, that review was worth like 13% of her grade. Yeah, that much. It dropped my grade from a 94 to an 81, to almost 2 letter grades. The same went for Alyssa, although she was able to get it overridden with a doctor's note. On top of that, we noticed that our professor put in attendance grades. This was weird, as while we knew that we would receive a letter grade drop if we missed more than 4 classes, there was no attendance policy outlined in the attendance policy. I only missed 3 classes, so I was getting zeros for those 3 absences. Alyssa noticed the same thing, except she had more than 4. Ever since she was called out by her professor for being apolitical, she understandably had a very weak attendance record for her class. For his class. But her grade didn't drop a full letter grade for her absences, but her grade dropped from an accumulation of zeros for attendance. Additionally, days that she had attended were not put in. Same went for mine, so both of us were really upset. Well, she was. I acted upset, but in my mind, I was just super happy because I was getting to talk to her. That's the thing about her, just being in her presence made me happy. Like, she could be screaming insults at me or tell me that I'm the most egregious person to walk this planet, and I would still be happy. Love is one crazy feeling. But I was upset with my grade though, and I will admit that. I told her that I would email our professor and see what he said about it, and she was thankful for that. Afterwards, we drifted away from the class to talk more about our personal lives. I particularly learned that why she wanted to go into social work and stuff. I'm not going to say any details because I want to kind of protect her privacy, but I still learned a lot about her and got to tell her stuff about me, particularly about why I'm going to accounting and stuff. So yeah, we both learned a lot about each other. We ended up talking for a whole hour and a half on the phone, which is a lot, but I wasn't complaining. The whole hour and 30 minutes made my entire day. In fact, just giving her my number made my entire day. So yeah, my life was awesome. However, as promised, I emailed our professor. I asked him that review as well as the attendance grades. He replied though, "Oh my god," was just absolutely pitiful. He said that he didn't need to add anything to the syllabus and that I should have come to class those days. But he said in such a rude and snarky manner, like he was trying to prove that he was right or something when I was simply asking a couple questions. On top of that, his email's quality was just super unprofessional. I don't know how people like him managed to get a job as a professor, because a professor is supposed to be able to communicate and be professional, not assert dominance or something like that. Just absolutely pathetic and disrespectful of him to reply to me in that kind of manner. I would tell Alyssa about this the next day. Anyways, let's move on to the next day, being Thursday, May 5th. So this is the day that I decided to take my Western History final. Even though I had the so-called required schedule block the next day from 8 a.m. to 10:30, I just wanted to get the exam over with. So I did that night. I ended up making an 86 on it. Not bad, I told myself. So I looked how it would affect my grade, and it decreased my grade? What? My grade was an 81, but this exam actually dropped my grade to a 79. How the hell did that happen? In fact, how the hell was that even possible? Under no circumstances should an 86 on an exam worth more than 0% of our grade decrease my grade if my grade sat in an 81. That's mathematically impossible. So I did probably the most exact thing at this point and called Alyssa. I first actually told her about my professor's response to the email. I screenshotted it and showed it to her, and she agreed with me. She thought our professor was incredibly rude and unprofessional as well, so I at least had someone to back me up on these claims. Her support definitely made me feel a little better. But after that, we talked about the final. She had taken her final herself beforehand, and she made an 88 on it. When I told her about my 86 dropped my grade to a 79, she said that it happened to her as well. I can't remember exactly what her grade in the class was before in the final, but it dropped hers as well. Now, after seeing the shit show that my professor pulled with his rude email, we decided that it would not be a good idea to email him asking about this, because not only was he going to be not going to be helpful, but he was going to be very rude, so we decided that we just shouldn't do that. Instead, Alyssa proposed that we just sleep on this and wait the next day, so that's what we did. Now, the next day was the day that we were supposed to go to our final, but since me and Alyssa both completed the final, we decided not to attend. After all, even though he said the attendance was required, he also said that he was not going to be taking it. This is just one example of how indirect he was with his instructions, so we decided not to attend. However, it seems like Alyssa's ideas of sleeping on her exam actually worked. So I was looking over my grade percentages and how they worked. I particularly spotted the section called Midterm and Final. At first, I didn't think much about it. However, I realized that this meant that both the midterm and the final were placed in the same block. After coming to this revolution, I called her and told her what I discovered. I explained to her how this was calculated. I found out because of how it was combined with the midterm onto one block. The final could only maintain a grade if we made 100, or it could harm a grade if we made below 100. Just as I was, she was furious over this, as it was just completely unfair to make it so that the final could only harm a grade if we did the midterm. Both of us, of course, did this midterm back in February, so the final could only harm a grade. For those who did not do the midterm, the final could have only improved their grade. So basically, our professor was catering towards those who was not doing their work. Exactly what he ranted about the class after the midterm. Yeah, this dude is a hypocrite. We decided that for this, as well as just not to email our professors, because it wouldn't have helped. So yeah, this meant that I was taking my first ever C. That sucked. Anyways, let's talk a little bit about that night. So this is my last night at college until August. My parents and sister were coming the next morning at 11 o'clock to help move my stuff out. I spent the next day mostly packing my stuff and getting prepared to move out and all. I particularly remember placing all my shirts and hoodies from a closet I stored all on my chair. I never had that stuff on my chair. Like, it looked like my chair could have fallen any second, but it was pretty hilarious. However, after packing, which would have been maybe 11 p.m., I became really hungry. This is a big problem. The dining halls were all closed at 8, which I think is just ridiculous since that was way too early to close, but I did not feel like spending money and going out to eat, so I just sat there and starved. However, in my mini fridge, I had 2 cans of Mountain Dew. I decided to just drink one to see if it would do anything, and sure enough, that Mountain Dew satisfied my hunger. I'm not even kidding. I stopped being hungry after drinking that Mountain Dew. So if you're hungry and all you got is soda, drink the soda. It will help. No idea why it works, but it did, so that satisfied me. Now, I was actually chilling on the couch while drinking it. I was the only person in the suite at the time, so I decided that I might as well sit that Mountain Dew in the living room while watching memes on Instagram. Then it must have been between 1:30 to 2 o'clock when Cooper got back. He had a tendency to be out through late hours. He saw me on the couch chilling with my Mountain Dew, and then we started talking. It was my last night, so we talked a little bit about wrapping up the semester and stuff. He had an engineering final the next day, so he had to get some sleep. So yeah, he had a Saturday final. That must have sucked. I wished him good luck. We didn't hug, and we said our final goodbyes, and that was the last time I saw him. So then let's talk about move out day, being Saturday, May 7th. So firstly, I decided that I needed to eat breakfast. So I woke up at 9 o'clock to eat breakfast. Afterwards, I got my things settled and ready to move in. To then, at 11, my parents and sister arrived. They helped me move my stuff onto my truck in their van. We also deep cleaned the suite, which the guys were very thankful for, and then I stuck my key into the keyhole in the lobby of the hall my room was in, and I left. Mom and my sister drove the van while Dad drove the truck. My dad is one of those who likes to be in control of things, so that's why he normally drives wherever we go. While on the road, I texted the guys I room with, thanking them for a great semester and wished them luck on all their future endeavors and stuff. Just typical farewell addresses. Then after a little bit, we made it back home. I pretty much just laid my stuff in my room and on the bed. In fact, it actually kind of looked like my roommate's side of the room. It was dirty and nothing was organized. I would get on top of this that Friday, as I had the house to myself that weekend, so I blasted some music and I deep cleaned my room. Anyways, a little bit after getting back home, me and my sister actually had to go so we could buy Mom a Mother's Day gift, as that was day before, as this was the day before Mother's Day, so we went off. However, this is the day when I learned that it was not going to happen with Alyssa. So me and my sister were talking about her, and that was when she decided to look her up on Instagram. She had an Instagram, but then I learned the bad news. Alyssa had a boyfriend. Damn it, if only I knew beforehand. But I mean, I can't really do anything about it, so I decided to just call it a loss and give up on all hope. But even though it was a failure, Alyssa was still the closest I'd ever been to getting into a relationship. In fact, she was actually a really good target, just for the simple fact that she acknowledged my existence, and because I was able to be someone whom she could come up with any problem and listen. So while I didn't get to date her, I still think that this was successful, just because I learned a lot about girls and what they want from a man. I ultimately wish both Alyssa and her boyfriend well, and I hope for a bright future for both of them. Now, at first I was super upset as it put me in a sour mood for the rest of the day, but I mean, I was just going through the stages of heartbreak. I would get over it the next day, so it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Now, even though I was moved back home, this did not mean that I was done with the semester. I still had my finals for both geology and calculus, and I would also see some interesting results from Western history. My geology final would be online, which I would take on Tuesday, May 10th. Then for calculus, I would actually commute to college and take it on Wednesday, May 11th. But first, let's talk about the thing for Western history, since it happened on Monday, May 9th. So I went and checked my grade, and for whatever reason, I was now sitting at an 81. I was incredibly confused, because after the final, my grade was a 79, and we had no other assignments to do afterwards. So how did my grade rise by 2 points, saving me from a B? So I called up Alyssa and asked her if she had anything weird happen to her grade. She said that her grade was the same. However, while talking, she did bring up extra credit. So back in I think early February, as well as during spring break during early March, our professor provided extra credit. It wasn't really anything extra, it was just busy work, especially the one over spring break. I ended up doing both of them just because I didn't have anything going on. Alyssa, however, did not do those extra credit assignments, so we compared our grades and determined that the reason my grade jumped to an 81 was because of those extra credit assignments. That solved pretty much all of my confusion about this. Afterwards, me and Alyssa actually started talking more about non-Western history topics, you know, just being friends and stuff, and then she had to get back to work, and so we said goodbye and we hung up. That was the last time I talked to her. So then, the next day, I took my geology final. So like the other 3 exams, this exam was completely online. It was also open book, open note, and open internet, so I had the power of Quizlet on my side. Even though it was online, we still had to work on it from the time provided by the university, that being from 11 to 1:30. So I had to be extremely productive during these 2.5 hours. Another thing is that the final was split into 2 parts. So the first part was a conceptual image-based exam. We had to determine what the answer was based off images. This is actually why our professor made this test open internet, as he didn't necessarily want us to memorize information. He wanted us to apply it. This part of the final wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. In fact, I actually made a 90 on it, which I was extremely satisfied with. Then came the second part of the exam. This was formatted exactly how our 3 exams throughout the semester were formatted, so it was rather straightforward. After about an hour and 15 minutes, I finished and submitted the exam. I then saw my grade. I made a 96 on it. This put my final exam grade at a 95 when you include the first part. I was really thrilled. I mean, come on, I made a 95 on my geology final. Geology was a very difficult class, so I was happy to have it that high. However, I unfortunately did not make enough to make an A in the class. My grade ended up sitting at an 89.6. Now, while this was actually just a prediction, as a professor had not put in attendance, attendance was extra credit, and although I attended almost every class, I thought I was about 2 classes from making an A. This sucked, and I was rather upset about this since I was so close to an A. But then, my professor put in extra credit for attendance, but by the great grace of God, after he put in the attendance for extra credit, my grade rose to a 90.04. Yes, a 90.04. Had I missed just one more exam question, or one more class, or even one more extra credit assignment question, I would have made a B. This is quite possibly the clutchest grade I've ever received in any class I've ever took. So then let's move on to calculus. So the next day at around 1 p.m., I left my home and went up to college to take it. Well, it actually did not start until 5, but I did not want to get into a rush hour traffic. So I left at 1, arrived there at 2, and studied for a couple hours. I had some good studying, and then at 4:45, it was time to go and take it. So I went and took it, and went over and took it. Now, this finals time was from 5 to 7:30, which definitely benefited me as a night person. This was definitely needed, as this was an incredibly high stakes exam. It was worth 30% of our grade, and I needed at least an 87 to make an A in calculus, so I was very nervous. After sitting in the classroom for a little bit, our professor arrived and handed us our test. It was time, the last final of the semester. Now, thankfully, he did not treat this exam like our third exam. We had 36 multiple choice questions. However, we still had 4 problems at the end where he would check our work and stuff. But the best part about those questions is that those 4 questions were actually questions on the multiple choice section. So literally all we were doing was replicating our work here and we could get double credit. He actually addressed this and said that this was intentional, as he wanted us to give us a little bit of grace on this test. So this was definitely very nice of him to do. Anyways, this test itself was actually not that bad at all. The questions were in the order of when we talked about them. To explain, the first questions were topics we talked about back in January, which were limits, and our final questions would be our most recent topic, which was definite integrals. So we could pace ourselves on this test a lot easier since we weren't mixing things around. Now, that wasn't the case for the pre-response questions, but that didn't really matter since they were directly taken off the multiple choice section. Anyways, I ended up working on this theme for about an hour and 45 minutes. Afterwards, I handed the test to my professor and that was it. I was officially finished with the spring 2022 semester, my first semester at college. Now, the free response being taken directly off the multiple choice section was actually not the only nice thing our professor did. He also graded our final on a scale. On the previous test, he didn't do this. However, I actually did not even need this scale because my raw score was a 90. This meant that I was making an A in the class, which I was incredibly thrilled about. But the scale made everything so much better. It actually brought my grade up all the way to a 100. Yes, I made a 100 on my calculus final. I was in disbelief when I saw this. While I was confident that I was making an A on the final, I was not confident that I would make a perfect score on it. But hey, I did it. I made a 100 on it. It also made me even happier knowing that I made 100 as my scale score meant that I had the highest grade in the entire class. Out of 100 students, I got the highest score, as well as the only 100. That was satisfying. So yeah, that was the end of my first semester of college. It was very rough, but I learned a lot from it and I developed even more maturity from it as well. And while I struggled immensely throughout the semester, I came out with all A's and 1 B. I think that's pretty good for a 17-year-old in college. So now that I told about my first semester of college, what does the future hold? Well, right now, I am taking a summer class. It is Econ 2102, which is Principles of Microeconomics. This is actually my first real business course, if that's what you want to call it. Since that other business class was just one credit class, microeconomics is really fun, but it's a lot of work. But I'm starting to maintain it more and more, and because of that, I want to minor in economics even more. It also helps my professor is super cool and is really nice overall. In fact, the best part about him is I get to have him again this fall, which I'll get to in a bit. Now, that class will end in late June. In early July, I will start my second summer class, being Accounting 2121, which is Principles of Accounting 1. Finally, my first accounting class. I'm really excited about this class, because the professor seems really cool. He actually just recently co-authored a book about forensic accounting, which is pretty cool, so I think it'll be a really good class. Then, in August, I'll be moving back to college and start the fall 2022 semester. I'll of course do a story time on it, probably in January of 2023, so be on the lookout for it. Now, that semester will also be a lot more enjoyable than this semester for sure. Of course, I'm not used to the campus format and where I'm now used to the campus format and everything is now compared to last semester, or compared to spring 2022. So I won't have to worry about fighting stuff next semester. In addition, I will of course have my own room. While I have contacted my future suite mate, I haven't heard back from him. I guess as time passes, I'll probably hear from him and stuff. And I think the best part about that though is that if he gets in trouble or he isn't a cool person, that's completely okay since I won't be sharing a room with him. So if things don't work out, then I can always retreat to my room and be alone, which I think will work out perfectly. My parents are also happy about it too. Of course, Dad has been guiding me through this process, so he's happy about it being successful after all the barriers we had to overcome. And then Mom's happy about it because she gets to decorate my room. My room will probably be the same areas as the room that I shared this past semester, just that I get the whole room to myself. So Mom will be pretty much working with double area as well as not having to worry about Wii posters either. So this is going to be great for not just me, but the whole family as well. And on top of that, I have 4 friends from early college who are coming to my college this fall. Since I've already got a semester under my belt, I'll be kind of like the leader for them. I'll be showing the 4 where everything is, helping them find where classes are, and just having some fun with them. So this upcoming semester is going to be pretty awesome. On top of that, I also created a schedule that I think works a lot better than this past semester. So I will only be taking 4 classes. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I'll have Principles of Macroeconomics from 10:10 to 11, the same professor I have for Microeconomics just to make it better, and I'll have Business Law from 12:20 to 1:10. Then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'll have Intermediate Accounting 1 from 10 o'clock to 11:15, as well as Elements of Statistics from 1 to 2:15. I think this is a perfect schedule, as it gives me a lot of time in between classes. I also think that 10 a.m. will be a perfect time to start. It won't be too early like my 9 a.m. Western History class was, but it won't be too late like my 11:30 Geology class. It also won't be overly late. My latest class will of course be Statistics, which will end at 2:15. I think this is good because it's an afternoon class, not too late. Like on Wednesdays, I had 6 hours in between Western History and Calculus. Even though it was a lot of time, I felt like this was too much downtime. So I think having an hour and 3 hours of downtime in this upcoming semester will work a lot better. On top of that, these classes are all related to both my major and minor, so I think I'll have a lot better time with them and have my classes this past semester, since I'll actually be using the material I learned these classes as an accountant or a CPA, so I'll be really excited to take these classes. So now for the final part of Storytime, I want to give advice. Now, as I've stated multiple other Storytimes, I don't like giving advice. Storytimes are meant to be more entertaining than advisable, but the reason I'm going to give advice here is because most of my peers back from early college are going up to college and stuff. On top of that, there also might be a few y'all who are going up to college. I think the advice I'll give will be very helpful, and I hope you do apply it when you go off to college. So first and probably most valuable piece of advice I can give is to go to class. In college, you will find that most professors don't take attendance. Although that wasn't the case with me, but it will be very likely for the case for you. To prove my point, let's go back to geology, to when my geology professor showed us a scatter plot after our third exam and demonstrated the correlation between the scores and attendance. People who went to class had higher attendance scores than people who didn't. So while it doesn't seem like much, attendance is very important for your success. Another thing too is that if you skip class, it will be incredibly easy to skip another one too. Pretty soon you will not have been to class in a while. So that's why you should attend class, as it is very easy to get in trouble in the habit of not attending. On top of that, even if your professor doesn't take attendance, but notices that you still come to class and do your work, they can still give you an A. Look at what happened in Earth Science. My professor noticed that I came to class and did my work, so she decided to bump my grade up to an A, so attending class is very important. My second piece of advice is really simple. Do not under any circumstances sign up for an 8 a.m. Even if it's all that's left, do not sign up for it. When you go off to college, if you are a morning person, you're going to start developing some night tendencies. What I mean is that wake up at 6:30 is going to be even harder to do in college than it might have been in high school. On top of that, most people's brains need time to work at full capacity, so 8 a.m. is not going to be your best interest. And if you are a night person like me, then don't even go after a 9 a.m. class either. Western history was a pain in the ass. Outside of the professor being really narcissistic, it was also a pain in the ass waking up at 7:30 or 8 a.m. It's just absolutely painful to do. So don't take a 9 a.m. if you aren't a morning person, and certainly do not take an 8 a.m. no matter if you are you're a morning or night person. That actually kind of leads me to my third piece of advice, that being to schedule your classes strategically. To maximize your success, you need to know when your brain works best. This semester, I just went in and scheduled my classes based on what was available and not necessarily based on my professors. Don't do this. Instead, be knowledgeable about how you as a person work and your mind works best. Don't sign up for a night class if you know you are a morning person and vice versa. Also, do not sign up for a class directly after another. Believe me, doing Earth Science right after Geology was always a pain. Then 15 minutes break was too little. My advice here is to have at least an hour in between classes to help you refresh your mind. That way, coming into your next class, you aren't completely drained. My third thing about strategic scheduling has to do with the classes you sign up for. If you have a heavy workload with some difficult classes, sign up for another class that is rather easy and can calm your workload. I'll call these buffer classes. These classes make it so that you aren't completely compiled and they help you manage stress and anxiety you might have about other classes. My fourth piece of advice is to use the Rate My Professor. While I was at early college, my quantitative literacy professor back in 10th grade introduced us to this platform and encouraged us to use it for future classes, as well as to write honest reviews on our professors, himself included. I would recommend using this when determining which professors to sign up for, but do use it with a grain of salt. You will need to determine which reviews are honest and useful, and which ones are not honest and unhelpful. To do this, I recommend finding which reviews are the most professionally written. These tend to be the most honest and most useful reviews. The ones that just flat out insult professors should be ignored, since they were probably written by some kid who only attended class like 3 times the whole semester. While I didn't use Rate My Professor this past semester, I did use it while registering for summer and fall classes, and because of that, I was able to sign up for good professors, including my economics professor who's been downright incredible. Speaking of him, another thing about professors is that if you can register for another class with them, I highly recommend doing that. It'll make the class exponentially easier because you'll already know how the professor does things and their expectations. That's why I said that macroeconomics was going to be my buffer class for this fall, since my professor for macroeconomics will be the same professor I currently have for microeconomics. Now, there is an exception to this advice, and as if your professor was a piece of shit, then do not sign up for them again. Like my Western history professor, if I had the option to take another class under him, I would not do it. But if the professor you have is at least decent and you can take them again, then I would recommend signing up for them again, because it would make the class a lot easier. Now, I also know this from early college. So I had the same professor for pre-calc in 10th grade that I did for trigonometry in 11th grade. Pre-calc was really challenging because not only did I take it during the spring 2020 semester, but I also struggled with this professor's different style of teaching. I ended up making 85 in this class, but then in the spring 2021 semester, I took trigonometry under the same professor, and because I knew how she did things, and of course because the class was in person the whole semester, I ended up making a 95 in this class. I think that just comes to show why taking the class under the same professor makes the class a lot easier, just because you are used to how they are doing things and what they expect. My fifth piece of advice is to get involved. More specifically, join a student organization. No matter what college or university you go to, you will find multiple student organizations. Unfortunately, because my university's completely bullshit rule, I couldn't participate in student organizations due to my age. But considering not many of y'all are watching this entering college at 17 years old, y'all can easily get involved. In fact, I was still able to get involved through the Campus Bible Fellowship, so there's quite a lot of opportunities, even if you can't join like regular student orgs. Now, I say this because student organizations are the easiest way to make friends at college. The reason is because when you join a club, you have a common interest with everyone, which is the topic of that club. Even though Campus Bible Fellowship isn't an organization, I was still able to make friends since we all shared a common interest, that being religious beliefs, and I also remember talking with Cooper sometime this semester, and he said he met friends through the running club. So if you want friends, in fact you actually need friends, I highly recommend joining a student organization. And plus, if it applies to the field you go into after college, that club can look really good on a resume. My sixth piece of advice might sound a little weird, but believe me, you'll know what I mean if you follow it. And that's buy some AirPods. I've always been reluctant about AirPods since they came out, but back in January, I bought myself a pair, and wow, that was such a good investment. This was always there's always something special about walking around campus, walking to the cafeteria, while listening to Fall Out Boy or Slipknot or something, or just some other band I love. It just spiced up walking around campus so much, so I would definitely recommend buying some AirPods. It makes walking around campus so much enjoyable. My seventh piece of advice will have to do with roommates. So for your first year, it is very likely that you are sharing a room with someone. If that is the case, I recommend you to be as respectful as possible to your roommate and try to be their friend. It will make living with someone a whole lot more manageable. Now, of course, your roommate may not be your best friend, or he could be like mine, someone whom you may not get along with. That happens. If that does, then that gives you another reason to get involved, so you can get away from them. In fact, just try to stay away from them as much as possible. My roommate getting a girlfriend worked out perfectly for both of us, as it kept us apart. It also gave him somewhere to smoke his weed or do whatever else he feels like doing that I didn't really approve of. Now, if your roommate does not leave like 3 months early, try to find places to go where they aren't. Drive around, go to the library, go home on the weekends. Just do what you can to get away from them. My eighth and final piece of advice is to act mature, and know where you came from. As stated, particularly with guys, whenever they go off to college, they become stupidly immature. They become immature because they don't know how to act independently. So that's why they do things like setting off fire alarms, drawing penises on whiteboards, because they don't have the parents controlling them. However, just remember where you came from, and remember how old you are. Even though I was the youngest student, it would still be incredibly dumb and ridiculous to act like a 7-year-old. So I didn't. In fact, I'd say I tend to act much more maturely than others my age. So if you are going into college at 18 years old, do not act like an 8-year-old going off to camp for the first time. Act your age and you'll be better off. So yeah, that's all I got for this story time. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next story time, whenever it releases. Anyways,